Chapter 488. Seeing that the magic elves were all dressed up, Dake clapped his hands and asked the maid beside him to open the box in her hand. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed, and neatly stacked holy coins appeared in front of the magic elves. One little red flower for 100 holy coins. Dake spread out his hands and smiled. The magic elves' attention was immediately attracted, but they couldn't tell the value ratio between the little red flower and the holy coins, so they just looked at each other and didn't say anything. In the end, it was the relatively wealthy Milkkin who made the first move and exchanged a little red flower for 100 holy coins. The rest of the magic elves followed suit and went forward to exchange. They didn't have to worry about food and drink in the Duke's mansion, and they could get whatever they wanted with just a grunt. But what others gave and what they bought were always different. And it was their first time out, so they had to buy some souvenirs or some personal items that they didn't want others to know about. But for Dake, these weren't important. Remember, https://mvipcanchu. VIP. The real key was that the little red flower could be given a more practical value after a few exchanges like this. That was very important for the construction of the little red flower currency system. After distributing the holy coins, Dake did a little morning exercise and went to the dining room. Olga made him a cup of goat's milk and handed him a roll of newspaper before leaving to prepare breakfast. Dake tasted the goat's milk and looked at the newspaper. Suddenly he had an idea. "I want to drink milk tea." So when Olga came back again, he casually reminded her. The method of making milk tea wasn't difficult, and it was very simple for a mage who was good at brewing potions. Its specialty was the variety of flavors and the pearls that made it popular. After seeing Olga leave in high spirits, Dake knew that he would be able to drink milk tea after a long time when he came back tonight. A cup of milk tea in the morning and in the evening would make him fat every day. At about 7:30, the magic elves who were dressed up poured into the dining room. After that, Deanna and Aurora, who had come to class, also entered the dining room hand in hand. The two sisters seemed to have come to an agreement. They wore the same style of sun hat, white dress, and silver hair of the same color. Standing together, they looked like a pair of sisters. Oh, they were related by blood to begin with, so it was fine. Dake lowered the newspaper slightly and read it carefully. Although Deanna was 1 year older than Aurora, she didn't have an advantage in height. Her slightly round face and lively demeanor made her look younger than the quiet and well-behaved Aurora. Perhaps the only thing that could show her age advantage was that she was much more open-minded than her peers. "Have you eaten?" Dake asked when Deanna climbed onto the chair and sat down. Deanna smiled and said, "You can try it again. Be careful not to get fat," Aurora said. Deanna closed her eyes and shook her head quickly. No. Then, she looked greedily at the breakfast served by the female servants. The breakfast in the Duke's mansion was much better than the one in her house. After a satisfying breakfast, the three of them rested for a while before leading the magic elves out of the Duke's mansion. At the entrance of the Duke's mansion, the head maid of the Lion Palace maid group, Trina, was already waiting with 2 female servants and 3 dragon tamer guards. Trina was 1.8 meters tall. She had short brown hair, a tall figure, and straight legs. She looked like a majestic lioness. The 2 female servants under her also had the same style, but they didn't look as imposing. For this trip, Trina prepared a total of 3 carriages. Although she was surprised that the young master was going to take the elves out to play, when she thought about how he hired 4 tutors for the elves, she felt that it was quite normal. It was just that with so many people going out, it would be difficult to take care of them. As the execution ceremony of the Demon King was getting closer and closer, there were quite a few small fries entering the capital. Although those small fries couldn't threaten the young master, if they disturbed the young master's rare mood, they deserved to die. Therefore, she called for 2 extra female servants. Of course, they were battle maids. When Dake saw the 3 carriages, he nodded with satisfaction, then turned around and said, "How do we split them?" Of course, he was asking about the elves. Including the moon god's soul, there were a total of 19 elves. They needed to be split into 3 carriages. Luckily, the Duke's mansion's carriages were spacious enough. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to fit in. But when he said this, The little demon beast reacted quickly and flew to his shoulder. It was as if it was saying that it didn't take up any space, so there was no need to split them. The vampire princess rolled her eyes and pulled the phoenix girl up. She bent her body and stealthily walked towards the carriage in the middle. Only Ibu stared at it with wide eyes. It waved its ribbon antennae and acted like a spoiled child. Dake looked around and simply said, "How about this? The Dilu beast and the lion beast will lead the teams. The Dilu beast, the vampire girl, the phoenix girl, Kettle, the scabbard, and the young cyanide dragon are one team. The lion beast, the moon girl, the trash slime, the 100 faces, the milk can, the sea lion, and the wrestling hawkman are one team. The remaining little demon beast, the dream demon, Meow Meow, Ibu, the fairy Ibu, and the magician's secretary are one team." The reason for this distribution was, of course, carefully chosen. Firstly, the young cyanide dragon's body was bigger, so it had to be separated from the lion beast. Secondly, Kettle's movement speed was slower, so it could lie on the cyanide dragon's back or fly on its sword. The trash slime and the 100 faces were bound to be in the same group. The milk can, the sea lion, and the wrestling hawkman were familiar with each other, so they were suitable to be in the same group. As for the other elves, the fairy Ibu and Ibu-chan had gotten second and third place in the end-of-term exam. He had to satisfy their expectations as much as possible. The dream demon and Meow Meow were too naughty, so he had to control them personally. Of course, it was also because the 6 elves in his team were very petite and didn't take up much space. As for the magician's secretary, he could directly hold it in his hands. Dake had long since discovered that the magician's secretary actually liked being held in his hands very much. In this way, the world where no one would get hurt would be completed. The two of you sit in that carriage. Dake had a straight face as he chased the vampire's daughter and phoenix girl to the other carriage. The Dilu beast in charge of taking care of them couldn't help but sigh deeply. He grabbed the scabbard, brought Kettle and the young cyanide dragon, and walked towards the carriage. On the other side, the lion beast that was leading the team also called the elves in the team and boarded the other carriage. Then, Dake held the magician's secretary in his hands and led the way towards the middle carriage. Meow Meow and the dream demon, who actually wanted to be released, puckered their lips and followed behind him. As for the fairy Ibu and Ibu-chan, their faces were naturally filled with joy. However, just as Ibu-chan and fairy Ibu were about to speed up and run to Dake's sides, a shadow suddenly enveloped them from behind. Their feet floated in the air, and they were already picked up by Deanna and Aurora. The little sisters of Ibu happily followed Dake's footsteps. A few minutes later, the 3 carriages pulled by the dragon wildebeest set off one after another. Each carriage was accompanied by a dragon tamer guard and a maid. The dimming family emblem engraved on the carriage was dazzling. After the elves set off from the carriage, they opened the windows and leaned against the window railings to look out curiously. For the elves that were born not long ago, everything in the outside world was filled with a sense of novelty. Although the Dilu beast and the lion beast were entrusted with trust, in reality, they were babies that were born less than a year ago. No matter how mature they looked on the outside, it couldn't hide the immaturity in their hearts. The large young cyanide dragon carefully shrunk its body to avoid accidentally occupying too much space. It opened its big round eyes and curiously looked at the scenery that flowed past the 2 sides of the carriage. The world was very big. If it was possible, who wouldn't want to go out and walk? Inside the carriage that was running at the front, Dake quietly flipped through the contents of the book that was scanned by the magician's secretary. The dream demon would occasionally poke its head down from the top of his head and play a little game of eye-to-eye with him. Deanna and Aurora each held an Ibu and imitated Dake's way of grooming their fur. The little demon beast firmly held onto the curtain with its claws and poked its head out. Meow Meow occupied the window on the other side. Katrina was peeling an apple. The carriage would occasionally shake twice, but her fingers were always steady. The apple was cut into standard cubes and placed on a fruit plate. After she finished cutting the apple, she carried the fruit plate to Dake's side. She used a fork to pick up a piece of apple and fed it to Dake's mouth. Dake opened his mouth and bit the apple. He pulled it out from the fork and chewed twice. Immediately, juice flowed out. At that moment he suddenly thought of a possibility. Thus he curiously asked, Katrina, do you have that kind of special apple? I mean the kind that is rich in magic. Magic plant? Katrina slightly frowned. She was not very good at this kind of content. Aurora tilted her head and whispered, Magic apple, the golden apple? Golden apple. Dake couldn't help but put down the magician's secretary in his hand and raised his head slightly. Speaking of the golden apple, it was indeed the most famous among the magic apples. In this world, part of the legend of the golden apple from Dake's previous world was also relatively complete. However, it was not a legend related to the gods, but a legend related to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, as the first human male and female born by the saint, had extraordinary significance in the legend of the saint. According to the records of the saint, after Adam and Eve were born, they lived in a paradise called Eden. The saint told Adam and Eve that all the fruits on the trees in the garden could be eaten, but the fruits on the tree of knowledge of good and evil were not to be eaten or touched. However, Eve was tempted by the snake and stole the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and gave the fruit to Adam to eat. After the saint found out, he expelled Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. The fruit here was the golden apple. In the teachings that have been passed down to this day, some people called the golden apple the fruit of wisdom, believing that it was the key to unlocking human wisdom. Some people also called it the forbidden fruit, believing that it was the beginning of human original sin and all other sins. However, as time passed, the golden apple had long lost its original meaning. After generations of reproduction, the divine power it contained became thinner and thinner. The golden apple today was only used as a breeding tool to maintain the purity of the bloodline, and it was held by the elves and fairies. However, even so, the golden apple was an extremely effective magic plant. If he could obtain the golden apple to create a magic fairy. Dake knocked his head, thinking that he was dreaming. He then asked, Is there a slightly more ordinary one? The little devil beast suddenly interrupted. You can ask Teacher Plant. Miss Plant? Dake couldn't help but ponder. As the former director of the Royal Botanical Garden, and a senior mage who was proficient in the grass element, Miss Plant was indeed a very suitable person to consult. Then let's go back and ask. After Dake made the decision, he continued to flip through the magician's book. About half an hour later, the carriage entered the largest market in the royal capital, the Eugenie Trade Circle. In this trade circle, which was led by the largest merchant guild in the royal capital, the Eugenie Merchant Guild, travelers and merchants from all over the royal capital came and went, bringing in things from the outside and bringing out things from the inside. Almost all ordinary items could be bought here. Even so, Dake rarely came here, because there was too much life here. Dake Dimeng, who was born in the tower and lived in the tower, was actually incompatible with a place like this. But that was all in the past. For the current Dake Dimeng, the so-called Eugenie Trade Circle was just a slightly larger market for small goods. He was quite interested in the travelers and adventurers who were active in this area. If they wanted to see the world and broaden their horizons, there was no better place than this. After they were done here, he would bring them to a more luxurious place. The Dimeng family emblem engraved on the carriage was dazzling enough that the carriages in front of them couldn't wait to avoid it. The merchants might not recognize the big nobles, but they definitely wouldn't mistake the family emblem of a big noble. For those who were cautious and had a hard time surviving, they couldn't and didn't dare to offend any big noble. Even if a newcomer didn't recognize the emblem, the older generation would quickly remind them to prevent the innocent from being implicated. Although the Duke's family had always had a good reputation, it was only a reputation. Once they offended them, they couldn't rely on their reputation, right? Therefore, the three carriages that drove straight in were like giant swords that pierced through the market, causing a huge impact on the entire trade circle in an instant. Some of the business giants retreated, but there were also merchants who wanted to look for opportunities who were ready to make a move. Adventurers from other places looked on curiously, while the dragonfish hidden in the crowd were estimating the value of life and death. People who weren't merchants, especially foreigners, didn't have a broad vision. There weren't many people who could recognize the Dimeng family emblem at first glance. But there were always people who paid attention to the Dimeng family, so they recognized it at first glance. 2 and 1 4000 plus. Pushbook. Chapter 489. Aaron Leaders was bending down to pick up the apple that had fallen. The apple that he had accidentally knocked off hit the ground and was bruised. He wiped the apple clean and said to the shopkeeper, "I'll take this apple." At that moment, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. He turned around and saw 3 carriages from the Duke's mansion slowly approaching. The Duke's mansion's carriages? Aaron Leaders frowned and lowered his head. Under the sunlight, the white-haired old man's face was covered with haze. He had been in the capital for a while, but the people from the Duke's mansion had been living in seclusion. Other than the Valkyrie and the Sage of Beasts, the only people who came in and out of the mansion were the 4 tutors. He hadn't been able to find a chance to get in touch with them. He didn't expect to see the Duke's mansion's carriages while he was waiting for an opportunity to relax. Naturally, only the Duke's mansion's insiders had the right to ride the dragon-horned horse carriages. Aaron Leaders took a deep breath. He knew his chance had come. Website. https://m, but can't you? VIP. The carriages slowed down after entering Eugenie's business circle and stopped in front of a tavern. This tavern was called Horseshoe, and it was an insignificant part of the Dimming family's business chain. However, it was still a part of the family's business. When the Dimings people came to Eugenie's business circle, they would park their carriages in the backyard of the tavern. The tavern owner's expression changed when he saw the owner's carriage. He hurriedly rushed out of the tavern. The tavern owner's name was Hansen. He was a brawny man with arms thicker than a normal person's thigh. As soon as he stepped out of the tavern, he whispered to the leader of the dragon tamers, "May I know who is visiting?" The 2 men looked at each other. The leader smiled and replied, "It's the young master." Young master. Hansen was stunned for a moment. He seemed to be thinking about which young master it was. His eyes drifted to the Dimming family's emblem. It was the Duke emblem. He panicked and asked, "Is it that young master?" The leader smiled and said, "Hansen, I've been transferred to the Duke's mansion for half a year." "How would I know?" Hansen rubbed his hands, and the tension on his face gradually eased. Although the young master of the Duke's family was naughty and mischievous, he would not go so far as to eat people. At most, he would tear down the tavern that he relied on for a living. It was nothing, really nothing. "Don't be nervous." Just as the dragon tamer guard was about to speak up for his young master, the door of the carriage had already been opened from the inside, and Lion Katrina stuck her head out. "We're here? We're here." The dragon tamer guard quickly replied. Trina didn't even look at Hansen as she said, "Let's go to the backyard first." The dragon tamer waited for her to turn around before driving the carriage into the backyard. The backyard of the tavern was quite spacious. 3 carriages pulled by dragon wildebeests entered one after another. Then Dake and the others slowly walked out of the carriages. Hansen, who had been following beside Dake Dimming all the way, watched helplessly as Dake Dimming alighted from the carriage. He felt as if there was a fire burning in his heart. Although he didn't have much contact with the young master, the young master's deeds had spread far and wide. This was especially true for taverns like them. They had to serve people every day, so they were quite well informed. Naturally, they had heard a lot about the young master's deeds. Although the young master didn't eat people, he was really good at tearing down homes. After today, this home, that he had lived in for more than 10 years, might be gone. "Is this Uncle Hansen?" Hansen blinked his eyes, thinking that he must be hallucinating. But he quickly noticed that young Master Dimming was indeed talking to him. "Uncle Hansen, don't you remember me?" After Dake alighted from the carriage, he said with a smile. Hansen's expression stiffened. He racked his brain, but he couldn't remember when he had met Dake. He could only force himself to laugh and say, "Welcome to the Horseshoe Tavern, young master. If there's anything you want to eat or drink, just tell me. I'll immediately send someone to find the head chef of the Eugenie restaurant to make it." Dake didn't deny it. "Looks like you really don't recognize me, Hansen. Actually, I came here 3 years ago." 3 years ago? Hansen closed his mouth and couldn't help but recall. Dake then said lightly, "Do you still remember the fire?" Hansen's expression changed. "That's you." Dake closed the book in his hand and turned to look at the kitchen on the other side of the courtyard. A trace of nostalgia appeared in his eyes. I'm sorry for burning down your kitchen, but Olga should have compensated you, right? Compensation? 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 His bones were almost broken, and he still wanted compensation? Hansen's heart was bitter, but he could only say against his will, yes, I did. No wonder. Back then, he had been racking his brains to figure out who he had offended. Not only had his kitchen been burned down for no reason, but he had also been beaten up by a gunny sack after it was over. He had thought that the other party was a child and didn't want to pursue the matter. But who would have thought that the unkempt child was the young master of the main house? Right, Olga? So the person who had beaten him up that day was the head maid of the Ares temple, Olga. No wonder he hadn't been able to fight back then. Hansen couldn't help but shiver. Dake saw that his expression wasn't right, and immediately realized that there might have been a mistake in his understanding of the information. But since that matter was in the past, it was in the past. Who hadn't been young and immature? Thus Dake easily forgave himself. Then he didn't look at Hansen anymore. He turned to the other two carriages and clapped his hands, saying, "Get off." In an instant, all the magic elves rushed out of the carriages. Hansen couldn't have imagined that there were so many magic creatures hidden in these 3 carriages, and there were even dragons among them. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and he didn't dare to say anything. After getting off the carriages, the magic elves all opened their eyes wide and looked around. The style of the tavern's backyard was quite similar to that of Traveler's Street, so they weren't unfamiliar with it. The vampire's daughter pulled the Phoenix girl and skipped over. She squeezed past Aurora and stuck close to Dake, asking, "Where are we going to play next?" Dake raised his head and looked outside. He smiled and said, "You 6 in a group. Bring the maid sister and go wherever you want. But don't forget to come back here before 11 o'clock. Let's have lunch in this tavern today. Maybe we can hear some interesting things from the adventurers." Really? The vampire's daughter's eyes immediately lit up. The Phoenix girl beside her was also moved. Although these magic elves had spiritual intelligence, it was because they had spiritual intelligence that they were more aware of their identity. The identity of magic elves shouldn't have anything to do with freedom. They could now think, learn, and even do many things that they wanted to do. It was all because of the existence of this master in front of them. Being his magic elves was the greatest happiness in this world. Not to mention, he loved and cared about them so much. Of course it's true. Dark nodded with a smile and then he said, "After you go out, buy whatever you want with your own holy coins. If you don't have enough, you can borrow from the maid sister. But for every 100 holy coins borrowed, you have to pay back 120 holy coins. When you go back, you have to use little red flowers to pay back. If your family's savings aren't enough to pay back the debt, every month after that, the amount of debt repayment will have to increase by 10%. Do you understand what I mean?" It wasn't just the vampire's daughter. The rest of the magic elves also quickly calculated in their hearts. Then their faces suddenly stiffened. They knew that they couldn't spend money recklessly no matter what. Otherwise, it was very likely that they would fall into an endless hell of debt repayment. But there were also magic elves who had a flash of inspiration and realized that this was a very big business opportunity. Since they had to pay 20% interest to borrow from the maid sister, what if they offered a loan with 10% interest? Kikik. Thinking of this, the little demon couldn't help but laugh out loud. Dake glanced at it and said, "The magic elves in my group can now apply to join other groups." Meow. Meow Meow immediately raised its paw. Demon Meow, Dream Demon also flew over. But Dake immediately said, "Meow Meow and Dream Demon can't." The 2 magic elves instantly became listless like frosted eggplants. But Dake already knew their natures very well. Once they were out of his control, Meow Meow's greed habit would definitely erupt. It was fine if it bought things like crazy, but he was afraid that it would buy things without spending money. As for Dream Demon, he didn't want to hear other people's screams on a rare day of leisure. Then what about me? When the other magic elves didn't express their willingness, the little demon pointed at itself with the tip of its wing. Dake was very reassured. "You can choose a group." The little demon immediately chose between the 2 groups of magic elves led by the Dilu Beast and the Lion Beast. The group led by the lion beast had that rich woman, the big milk can in it. It had no choice but to choose the group led by the Dilu beast. It just so happened that the vampire's daughter with the weakest mental strength was in that group. They were more or less from the same clan, so they could help each other. After the grouping was clear, a total of 3 groups filed out from the backyard of the Horseshoe Tavern. The appearance of such a group of magic elves would inevitably have an impact on the operation of Eugenie's business circle. In the eyes of people who didn't understand magic, this group of magic elves was actually no different from magic beasts. Fortunately, the vampire's little chicken wings were hidden in her clothes. Otherwise, it would cause more of a sensation. But since Dake brought them out, he wouldn't care about this. In fact, some adventurers would also bring tamed magic beasts with them. Some magisters were also used to bringing 1 or 2 magic elves with them. The only difference between him and them was that he had brought a little more people with him. So there was no problem at all. When the Dilu beast and the lion beast gradually left with the 2 groups of magic elves, Dake turned around and said, "What about you? Do you have any place you want to go?" Deanna blinked and said without hesitation, "Candy Bear House." Aurora curiously asked, "Is it the one that sells heart-penetrating plum candy? There's also a branch here?" Deanna stuck out her chest and said, "In the entire King's City, there's no candy house that I don't know." Dake revealed a trace of a smile. "Then let's go to Candy Bear House." So Dake took the secretary of the magisters, carried Meow Meow by the waist and set off. They didn't have any goal in the first place, so naturally, they would do whatever they wanted. Along the way, even if they encountered bandits who didn't have eyes, they would be scared witless by the power of the maid. Such a small episode like this could be used to cultivate one's temperament, and it was also good. Dake accompanied Deanna and Aurora to the candy house, to the snack bar, to the clothing store, to the toy store, to the bookstore, and even to the kitchenware store. Looking at Aurora's concentrated look when choosing kitchenware, Dake realized for the first time that she didn't only know how to do needlework. He just didn't know if her cooking skills were as good as Olga's. Happy times were always short-lived. In the blink of an eye, it was noon. Dake returned to the Horseshoe Tavern and sat down by the window on the 2nd floor. Looking at the bustling crowd downstairs, he felt quite relaxed. The owner of the tavern, Hansen, kept asking them what they wanted to eat, but Dake sent him away with a "do whatever you want." Not long after, some nut tea and pastries were served on the table. Then Hansen personally cooked and said that he would definitely make the young master bow down to his cooking skills. After that, he disappeared for a long time. It wasn't until the other 2 groups of magisters came back that Hansen came out with a pot of pickled fish. "This is a local specialty that I learned from the bards." Hansen saw the young master's surprised expression and couldn't help but feel proud. "Looks good." Dake wasn't stingy with his praise. Then he picked up a fork and dipped it directly into the pot. He forked a piece of fish into his bowl and tasted it carefully. He actually tasted the taste of the fish from his previous life. Just this taste was exactly the same as the one in his memory, and it was enough to whet his appetite. When Deanna saw Dake's rare expression, she couldn't help but feel hungry. Before lunch even started, they were already eating heartily. The magisters at the other 2 tables were immediately dissatisfied and knocked on the table with their knives and forks. If this behavior was in the Duke's mansion, they would definitely be severely reprimanded by the head maid Vigo. But the tavern had its own rules. People drank and sang, laughed and cursed, and it was very lively. At first, the customers were still afraid of the magisters, but as the magisters showed their childlike innocence, only curiosity was left in their eyes. As the atmosphere gradually relaxed, the tavern gradually regained its original atmosphere. Dake listened to the customers bragging and felt that it was interesting. On the 2nd floor of the tavern, there was a seat that was only 1 table away from Dake. An old man with white hair and beard laid out a deck of tarot cards on a single round table and started playing divination. This couldn't help but attract the attention of Dake and the others. Tarot cards were a very commonly used divination tool. Professor Midya Bartholomew had once talked about it in her astronomy class. Of course, she only gave a simple introduction. After all, the real tarot card divination was extremely profound and difficult to learn. In the streets and alleys, it was common to see prophets who used tarot card for divination, and 999% of them were liars. However, it was quite interesting to ask him for a divination when he knew that he was a swindler. Ibu stuck its head out from Deanna's arms. Ever since Professor Midya had taken a tarot card class, Dake had bought a deck of tarot cards for Ibu. Ibu clearly liked that deck of tarot cards and often played with it in the dormitory. Dark would occasionally see it using tarot cards to perform divination for the other elves. Of course, that was just a small game called divination. Now that it saw someone playing the same game in the tavern, Ibu was quite interested and wanted to go over. But just as it stuck its head out, the back of its neck was firmly grabbed. Deanna grabbed it back into her arms, stroked its back, and asked with a smile, "Do you want a divination?" Ibu immediately nodded. Then let's go take a look." Deanna grinned, jumped down from the chair, and excitedly went to the old man's table. At this time, there were 3 people receiving divination, and it seemed to be a small adventurer team. Dake saw Deanna walk over, and slowly walked over with the Magister's book. The adventurer team was made up of 2 men and 1 woman. This was quite common in adventurers' 3-man teams. After all, women were more attentive, and usually had some life skills. They would be careful with their spending, and it was easy for them to gain some advantages when interacting with others. In short, the existence of women was necessary for adventurer teams. That kind of 3-man team would often give people a feeling that they were overly masculine. A team of 2 women and 1 man would give people a feeling of being unreliable. This was the result of the difference in gender perception in this era. Dake glanced over and found that the only woman was a magic archer, which was a general term for archers who had grasped basic magic. As for the 2 men, one of them was a traditional warrior. He had a sense of aura but no magic waves. From the long sword hanging at his waist and the long spear in his hand, it could be seen that he was a warrior who was proficient in 2 weapons. The other male adventurer was a shield axe wielder, and at the same time, a traditional warrior who only practiced chi. In this adventurer team, the shield axe wielder was the vanguard, the swordsman, spearman, was the center guard, and the magic archer was the rear guard. They had both defense and attack, close combat and long-range combat, and a certain degree of magic attack ability. They were quite well-rounded. From the aura that leaked out between their eyebrows, they didn't seem like newbies who had just experienced battle. But at this time, the 3-man team was quite nervous. Did they take on a dangerous mission? Dake guessed as he walked to the table. He then looked at the clairvoyant. This old man with white hair and beard was in a slightly dispirited state of mind, but there weren't many wrinkles on his face. He had a bit of white hair and a youthful complexion, and he had the aura of an immortal. When an old man like this became a clairvoyant, he could often win people's trust from the first impression. "Old mister, how much do you charge for a divination?" the magic archer who sat down asked. The old man counted with his fingers and said, "Today's fate is here. I won't charge you." "Won't charge you?" The magic archer couldn't help but hesitate. "Will it be accurate?" The old man raised his eyelids and said, "Scammers do divination for money. I won't charge you, so what are you afraid of?" "That's true." The magic archer heaved a sigh of relief. "I want to know if my companions and I will encounter any danger in the next half a month." "Just this?" the old man asked. The magic archer nodded vigorously and said, "Just this." The old man responded and shuffled the cards on the spot. Then he arranged the tarot cards according to the magic array. Then, with a light tap, the tarot cards arranged in the magic array began to vibrate. A light array flashed, and the tarot cards returned to silence. But this back and forth added a bit of mystery to it. The onlookers, including Deanna and Ivan, became even more attentive. The magic archer was even more nervous. Did the divination come out? The old man smiled and said, "If fate was so easy to pry into, what would be the use of us clairvoyants? Give me your hand, palm up." The magic archer stretched out her hand. The old man's fingertips overflowed with magic, and he drew a 4 on her palm. Then he retracted his hand and said, "That's enough. From now on, your fate and the tarot cards are connected. Take out a tarot card, and it will show your fate. The magic archer sensed the remaining mana fluctuations in his hand, and pulled out one of the tarot cards on the table. She drew it very slowly, and beads of sweat gradually appeared on her face. If the tarot card in front of her could really predict the fate of the three of them for the next half a month, then her current actions would undoubtedly decide their fate. This put her under a lot of pressure. But from the moment her finger fell, fate was already decided. The old man reached out and pressed down on the tarot card she had drawn. Then he narrowed his eyes and said, "Give it to me." The magic archer couldn't help but retract her hand. Her two companions also stared intently at the tarot card. The old man directly opened the tarot card under everyone's gazes. What appeared on the card was a hanged man. The hanged man? The old man's face revealed a trace of bewilderment, and a haze appeared in the depths of his eyes. The magic archer noticed his subtle expression and asked nervously, "What does this card mean?" The old man was silent for a moment before slowly saying, "This is the hanged man. The hanged man symbolizes justice. Those who fear justice will hang him upside down. But justice will never compromise. Even if he hangs upside down, he will constantly reflect on himself and wait for the day of rescue. Then, what you are about to do, is it a righteous thing or an unrighteous thing?" The magic archer's expression changed slightly, and her red lips parted slightly. "Naturally, it's a righteous thing." The old man lowered his eyelids and said, "Since it's a righteous thing, there's no need to be afraid. No matter how bad the situation is, as long as you wait patiently, the misfortune will eventually pass." The magic archer couldn't help but look up at her two companions, but her companions didn't give her a response. She couldn't help but say, "So we will definitely encounter danger?" The old man nodded. Although it's not a good explanation, it's true. After saying that, he prepared to rearrange the tarot cards. However, the hanged man was suddenly held down by someone. Dake asked curiously, "What if it's an unrighteous thing?" 3 and 1 6,000 plus. Then write 4 to 6,000. Good luck. Chapter 490. The old man raised his head slightly and looked at him. He was not angry. If it was an unjust matter, it would have ended when you were hung upside down. People are most prone to panic when they are restrained. The sins hidden in their hearts will eventually be exposed. No one will release a sinner from the cross. After the three adventurers heard this, their eyes flashed. The magic archer could not help but ask, "There is really no solution?" The old man slowly said, "It is not too late to rein in the horse at the edge of the cliff." The magic archer's expression stiffened. After a while he said, "Thank you for your guidance, master." Then she suddenly stood up and quickly left with her two companions. The old man shook his head slightly and muttered to himself, "No choice, no choice." It really seemed like that. "Don't worry, it's our turn next." Deanna rushed to sit down and carried Ibuchan to the table. Ibuchan looked at the tarot cards in front of him with a curious expression. He remembered the URL. VIP, can't you? VIP. The old man carefully sized up this guest and asked, "Who will do the divination?" Squeak. Ibuchan immediately raised his paw. The old man's gaze was suspicious. Deanna nodded with a smile. Beside her, Trina, Aurora, and a few magic elves also gathered. The old man then said to Ibuchan, "Little thing, what do you want to divine?" Squeak, squeak, squeak. Ibuchan said excitedly. The old man's mouth twitched. Seeing that Dake and the others had no intention of translating, he arranged the tarot cards on the table and placed a few cards on the table. A scepter. A star coin. A holy grail. A treasure sword. Power, money, emotions, and conflict. Which will you choose? Ibuchan glanced at it and pressed his paw towards the treasure sword. But Deanna immediately grabbed his little paw and moved it to the holy grail. Squeak, squeak. The corners of Diana's mouth curled up. Omega? Once he pressed his paw, he naturally could not go back on his word. In the words of the fortune tellers, everything was fate. The old man shuffled the 4 arcana cards and said, "The scepter represents the elemental fire. It symbolizes excitement, energy, and creation. Star coin represented elemental earth, symbolizing money, material goods, and enjoyment. Holy Grail represented elemental water, symbolizing emotions, relationships, love, and inspiration. Treasure Sword represented the element of wind. It symbolized thoughts, wisdom, communication, and conflict. Since you have chosen the Holy Grail, then you must have some emotional problems that require divination. Squeak, Ibrahimovich's ears drooped. Deanna was in high spirits. Evie, who had poked her head out of Aurora's bosom, was waving her ribbons incessantly. The old man looked around. Seeing that no one objected, he began to set up the ceremony. He still used tarot cards to lay out a magic circle on the table, but it was obvious that the magic circle was completely different from before. It was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but in the end, he laid out a formation that resembled a heart. Then he pointed out 6 cards from the 6 corners of the formation. They were all Holy Grail. The 6 Holy Grail floated out of the tarot cards after he pointed at them. In an instant, they formed a hexagram. Seeing that Deanna and the others were attracted, the old man said, "The 2 of you each pick a card and place it on the hexagram." Both. Deanna blinked. The old man smiled and said, "Together." So, Deanna stared at the tarot cards on the table and observed them. Other than the 6 Holy Grail cards, all the other tarot cards were facing up. She could not tell which card was which. It was not easy to pick out the Lover card that symbolized union. While she was scratching her chin and thinking, Ibrahimovich had already stretched out her claws. She quickly picked out a card and placed it on the hexagram. Diana smacked her lips and casually picked a piece and placed it on the table. The old man stacked the 2 cards together and pressed them down. The hexagram instantly broke apart and turned into a fog of light that surrounded the 2 cards. The old man said softly, "Emotions are the most greedy, changeable, and complicated. My divination only showed a sign. The future is still uncertain." Deanna stared at the fog of light and blinked her eyes. The old man had already reached his hand in and flipped the 2 cards open. The patterns on the cards immediately appeared. One of them was Lover. The other was Grim Reaper. A man and a woman became lovers under the witness of an angel, but there was a poisonous snake on the tree of taboo. The god of death riding on a white horse and wearing armor declared his unstoppable power. Some people had already fallen. Some people accepted this cruel reality. Some people tried to avoid it, and some people were doing meaningless resistance. How do we interpret this? Deanna asked blankly. The old man also frowned slightly. After a while he said, "Lover is the best interpretation of feelings. But becoming lovers is only a part of the emotional path. Hidden behind Lover is the tree of taboo and the poisonous snake. Even if you stand out for many choices, it is very likely that you can't resist the temptation, quarrel, and break up. Death is a symbol of the end, but after the end is the beginning. Death also represents rebirth. As the saying goes, put death on the ground and fight to live. After experiencing too much, the feelings will be stronger." Then, Deanna asked, "Is this good or bad?" The old man said, "It depends on you." Ibiza looked confused. Deanna couldn't help but doubt. After all this talk, why did it come back to the topic? If it all depends on you, why do you want to do divination? However, the so-called divination was actually something like this. The old man just smiled at Deanna and rearranged the tarot cards. Then he looked at the others and asked, "Does anyone else want to do divination?" But perhaps because Deanna had drawn death, the others' interest was reduced. For a moment, no one wanted to continue the divination. The old man wasn't in a hurry. After he put away the tarot cards, he looked at Dake and said casually, "Then, my young friend, are you interested in chatting with this old man?" Although the old man's expression was very natural, suddenly looking for Dake for no reason still made Trina wary. But just as Trina's aura rose, she was stopped by Dake. Dake looked at the old man with white hair and a youthful face with great interest. He asked Deanna to get up and move aside. Deanna picked up Ibiza and left the seat obediently. Dake sat down and put the magician's secretary on the table. He said, "What is your name, sir?" The old man smiled and said, Aaron Leaders. Dake raised his eyebrows and wondered if he had heard this name before. Aaron Leaders smiled and said, You should know me. I am Ignatz Cooper's teacher. Ignatz Cooper? Dake couldn't help but frown. He began to think where he had heard this name before. Aaron Leaders observed his expression and suddenly had a bad feeling. You don't know Cooper? Cooper, oh Cooper. Dake thought carefully and clapped his hands. It's Cooper. Aaron Leaders let out a sigh of relief. You remember now. Dake shook his head seriously. Aaron Leaders' face stiffened slightly. You really don't know Cooper? Ignatz Cooper of the Church of Lore? Knowledge Holy Church. Dark suddenly realized something. So it's him. You're his teacher. Could it be that you're an elder of the Holy Church of Knowledge? Aaron Leaders nodded. One of the 13 elders. Dake couldn't help but smile. Since the victim is here, how is your church going to compensate for Ignatz Cooper's attack on me? Aaron Leaders smiled bitterly. That was not our intention. Dake said, I know. It was his personal behavior. All large corporations will pick out people who have bad behavior after an incident. Aaron Leaders hurriedly said, Absolutely not. Our church has no intention of getting involved in disputes. We have always maintained an absolutely friendly attitude toward the Duke's mansion and you. Dake smiled. So friendly that you want to worship us? Aaron Leaders smiled awkwardly and said, That was a matter of mutual consent. We just expressed our intentions. Dake nodded. I am willing to believe you on this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting in front of me in one piece. Ahem. Aaron Leaders coughed softly and said, Since Master Dimming has no intention of doing so, of course we won't force it. I came this time just to ask if Ignatz Cooper is doing well. If possible, I am willing to pay a price to redeem him. Aaron Leaders was obviously one of the more sensible people in the Church of Lore. The purpose of his trip was very simple. It was to bring back his troublesome student. Although the purpose was simple, it was not easy to achieve it. The Church of Lore and the Dimming family did not have any substantial interaction. It was difficult to pass a message through connections. This time, he was very lucky to be able to meet Master Dimming in Eugenie's business circle. However, Master Dimming did not seem to be easy to talk to. Ignatz Cooper. Dake tapped the table with his finger and pretended to be thinking. This was because he knew nothing about Ignatz Cooper's current situation. He could not answer Aaron Leaders' question at all. Ever since he met Cooper in the underground cold storage, Dake had completely handed him over to Scorpio Chris to deal with. He did not expect that Chris had not let him go yet. It had been a month, right? Maybe Ignatz Cooper was already dead. With this thought, Dake glanced at Katrina. Katrina shook her head slightly. Obviously, she did not pay attention. She rarely interfered in the field that Scorpio was in charge of. Therefore, Dake thought for a moment and said, There is no need for ransom. Since you call yourselves the Church of Lore, I have a few questions here. If you can answer them, I will let Ignatz Cooper go. A problem-solving test? Aaron Leaders could not help but fall into deep thought. Originally, problem-solving should be his area of expertise, but there were so many unsolvable problems in this world. If Dake specifically picked a few to make things difficult for him, no matter how knowledgeable he was, he would not be able to solve the unsolvable problems. As if seeing his concern, Dake curled his lips and said, Of course, if you can prove that the questions I raised are unsolvable, I will also let Ignatz Cooper go. Promise him, Aaron. In the corner of the tavern, a gray-haired granny suddenly stood up. This granny's face was younger than Aaron Leaders. Other than the crow's feet at the corner of her eyes, there were almost no wrinkles. Dake sized her up and found that her ears were slightly pointed. She obviously had some long-lived bloodline. He said gently, Is this also from the Church of Lore? One of the 13 elders, Aviva Julius. The granny walked over and sat down beside Leaders. There was a hint of arrogance and prejudice between her brows. She must be very confident in her knowledge. She stared at Dake and said, A question raised by a child can't possibly be difficult for the two of us. And the appearance of this Aviva Julius obviously made Aaron Leaders feel a lot more at ease. It was obvious that she had her own uniqueness. Dake sized up the granny without hiding anything and suddenly said, Half-fairy. The granny's eyebrows twitched, and she looked surprised. Very few people can tell that I'm a fairy hybrid at first glance. In fact, most people would think that she was a half-fairy when they saw her ears and face. Compared to the fairies that seem to only exist in legends, the elves were obviously more common and more widely known. Dake smiled. It's nothing. I'm just more familiar with fairies. How about this? Since there are two of you, I'll ask 2 questions. How about that? It's all the same, Aviva Julius said confidently. Julius. Aaron Leaders hurriedly gave her a look. But even if a woman was old, she was still a woman. Julius had no intention of responding to him at all. Dake couldn't help but smile. This pair was quite compatible. He said, Then I'll start. Do you need a pen and paper to record? No need, Julius said immediately. Okay. Dake nodded. First question. Listen carefully. Leaders and Julius immediately focused on listening. The voices around them subconsciously lowered. The people on the second floor of the tavern had already noticed the dispute. Many people were secretly eavesdropping. Some busybodies even took out pen and paper, ready to record the noble young master's question. Dake's eyes turned and he said, Let's say that n is an integer, and the product of nx is x to the power of n. Then, when n greater than 2, x to the power of n plus y to the power of n equals z to the power of n. Is there a positive integer solution? If there is, how do we prove it? If there isn't, how do we prove it? Wait, what's the nth degree of x? Julius subconsciously frowned. Dake said slowly, This involves the definition of power. 2 and 1 4,000 plus. I'm looking for votes at the usual time. It's the end of the month. If you don't vote, you'll grow wings and fly away. Chapter 491. Giving a new definition. Then giving an unsolved problem based on this definition. Dake Diming's behavior was undoubtedly the behavior of a hooligan. But he didn't think it was a problem at all. After Dark casually explained the definition of power, the 2 old men couldn't help but look at each other, and then firmly remembered the definition in their hearts. This kind of simplified definition was not rare, but looking at Dake Diming's appearance, it seemed to be one of the basic definitions of a complete set of computing systems. This kind of never-before-seen definition is actually a complete set. Could it be a unique calculation method taught by the Shungmalian Academy? Aaron Leaders thought quickly in his mind and asked, I roughly understand your question, but what's the point of researching this kind of question? Point. Dake leaned back and spun his finger on the magician's notebook. He said very straightforwardly, To make things difficult for you. Aaron Leaders' tone suddenly became sluggish. Dake seemed to think that this wasn't good, so he said, How about changing the word test? Memorize in 1 second https://m. VIP can't you? VIP in short, whether it was a test or a test, since he had a request, he could only accept it. Aaron Leaders and Aviva Julius wrote down Dake's first question and said, What's the second question? Dake grinned and said, The second question is also a half-solved proof question. I hope you can help me verify it. What do you mean? Leaders perked up. Dake said, We all know that the so-called even number refers to an integer that can be divided by 2. The so-called prime number refers to a number that is greater than 1. Other than 1 in itself, it cannot be divided by other natural numbers. Then, can any even number not less than 4 be written as the sum of 2 prime numbers? For example, 4 is equal to 2 plus 2. 6 is equal to 3 plus 3. 8 is equal to 3 plus 5. Aaron Leaders couldn't help but frown. The answer to this question should be yes. Dake asked, Then how do you prove it? This. Aaron Leaders couldn't help but look at Aviva Julius, who was next to him, but the latter also kept quiet. The corner of Dake's mouth curled up. That's settled then. When you can solve the answer, write down the proof process and send it to the Duke's mansion. As soon as I receive the answer, I will have someone release Ignaz Cooper. Well, if he was still alive. Dake really didn't know Ignaz Cooper's current situation, or he would have found a random reason to throw him out. It was a waste of food to keep them anyway. After he finished speaking, he got up and returned to the table, leisurely waiting for the official lunch. Aaron Leaders and Aviva Julia stayed for a while longer before leaving quickly. They needed a quiet place to solve the problem. Dake Diming's 2 difficult questions were actually proof questions. The first proof question, because it was the first time they came into contact with the concept of power, they couldn't understand the meaning of the proof question. But the second question, if he could prove the correctness of that inference, it would undoubtedly be very meaningful. Even if it was not to save Ignatz Cooper, even if it was just to solve the problem, they would still do it. But now it was even more urgent. Finally got rid of them. Dake looked at the backs of the 2 people as they left and couldn't help but shake his head. At this time, Katrina suddenly raised her hand and drew a line across her neck, asking, "Young master, why didn't you just let me do it?" Dake sipped his tea and said gently, "Katrina, times have changed. During war, we use force to subdue people. During peace, we have to learn to convince people with reason. You see, aren't those 2 elders of the Church of Knowledge quite reasonable?" Katrina was silent for a moment, then asked, "What about Ignatz Cooper?" Dake smiled. "Go back and take a look. If he's still alive, lock him up for another 2 months. Let him go after I start school." Katrina thought for a moment. "Understood. It's good that you understand." Dake drank the tea in his mouth and looked out the window. Outside the window, the Eugenie business circle was still bustling with traffic, and it didn't stop because of the arrival of lunchtime. The busy people were like the gears of a huge machine, constantly turning and pushing the whole era forward. 2:00 in the afternoon. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Dake continued to listen to the adventurers' stories in the tavern, listen to a bard's song, and watch the adventurers quarrel downstairs. Finally, he got back into the carriage and drove to the most prosperous area of the capital. It was an area that even ordinary small nobles couldn't enter, and the rich nobles didn't dare to cause trouble there. There, the people he met by chance could be prominent nobles, ministers, or old nobles with deep backgrounds. Even the children of the royal family often came in and out. Although the only children of the current king were first Prince Charles, first Princess Elisha, and the 2 little princesses, the royal bloodline was not limited to only these. They were born noble, and they wouldn't run into the civilian area without any scruples like the son of a duke. Their existence itself represented the face of the royal family. Therefore, their living area was generally in the noble area, such as the area where the Star Cluster building was located. The place they came to the most was the lush garden in front of him, which was known as the Royal Courtyard. And Dake's destination this time was the high-class place inside the lush garden, Soul and Dream. Ever since he received the VIP pass for Soul and Dream, on his birthday, Dake often wanted to come and take a look, but he didn't have the chance until today. He wasn't interested in the luxuries and high-class services in Soul and Dream, but, how should he put it? It was the itch of having a pass but not being able to use it. He had to go and take a look, right? So he finally came. The 3 carriages were unimpeded. No matter how high-class the lush garden was, it couldn't be better than the Duke's mansion. After the guards in charge of the gate confirmed the look in the eyes of the dragon tamer guard, they quickly moved aside. Although the 2 carriages at the back occasionally poked their heads out of the windows, which made them hesitate, they didn't force themselves to ask. However, one of the guards rode on a white horse and followed the first carriage in the name of leading the way. Not long after, the carriage stopped at the entrance of Soul and Dream. After Dake got down from the carriage, he raised his head slightly to observe. Standing in front of him was an ancient-looking castle, and there were no words related to the name of the place posted on the castle. If he didn't know beforehand, he wouldn't have thought that this was a place for consumption. More than half of the men and women who passed through the gate of the castle were accompanied by attendants. Is this Soul and Dream? Diana jumped down from the carriage and observed the castle with a curious look on her face. It should be. Dake smiled and said, "Speaking of which, it's my first time here as well. I wonder if it's as fascinating as its name says?" Aurora followed closely and asked curiously, "I heard that a glass of water here costs 100 holy coins. Is that true?" Dake blinked and said, "Is it that expensive? Maybe we should buy some drinks outside and bring them in." Aurora lowered her head subconsciously and grabbed the hem of her skirt. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. I'm just saying. Dake laughed and turned to the magic elves who came down one after another. Don't run around after you go in, okay? Okay. The vampire's daughter skipped over and said longingly, when can I have a castle like this? Dark glanced at her and casually said, when you become an archmage, you'll be able to earn enough money. The vampire's daughter's eyes lit up. Then when can I become a magister? Dake looked at her innocent face and couldn't help but laugh. 6 years later. 6 years later? Isn't that too late? The vampire's daughter suddenly pouted, and her spirits that had just been lifted up became dispirited again. However, she quickly discarded those thoughts and said happily, I'm Dake's magic elf. As long as Dake has it, I have it too. So Dake, do we have a castle? Dake thought for a moment and said, we do, but it's not in the royal city. Our Dimming family moved to the royal city later, and we have a castle in our original territory. It should be under the care of an uncle now. The vampire's daughter's eyes shone brighter. Then when can we go take a look? The vampire princesses in the stories all have castles. I can't be left behind. Dake's eyes drifted into the distance. Actually, I haven't been there either. Maybe next year we can go take a look. But this year, time is running out. Next year. The vampire's daughter couldn't help but look forward to it. Dake then took the lead and walked towards the castle gate. The 3 maids and the magic elves immediately followed. Such a group of people walking in a grandiose manner would naturally attract attention. Among the 2 rows of maids at the castle gate, there was one who was about 25 years old who quickly walked out and greeted them. Although it was Dake's first time here, the Duke's carriage was the best pass. Even if Dake didn't have the highest level pass, they would still welcome him warmly. At most, they would rush to make a new pass. However, Dake didn't want to make things difficult for them. He took out the pass and showed it to them. The maid immediately let out a sigh of relief and said warmly, Is this your first time here, young master? Dake said calmly, It's my first time. Do you have anything to pay attention to here? The maid said, You can call me Jessica. If it's possible, I will accompany you and explain the facilities and services of the club. Miss Jessica, my name is Dake Dimming. Dake showed a gentlemanly smile and extended his hand to her. Jessica bent down slightly, and the lace on her collar accentuated her fair skin, revealing her tender side. She respectfully shook Dake's hand and said, Young Master Dimming's pass is the highest level. Not only does it not have any restrictions, but it also has a free quota of 1 million holy coins per month. 10,000 cups of water? Dake was amused. Jessica's mouth twitched, and she almost couldn't keep up the intellectual look on her face. Dake smiled and said, No need to be so formal. We're here to play, not to inspect. Lead the way. Jessica quickly nodded and said, Yes, young master. Then, under Jessica's lead, the group entered Soul Haunting's castle. Although the castle's exterior was old, the interior design was very modern. It perfectly combined the trends of the old and new era, and it didn't look out of place at all. The nobles and ladies walking in the corridor were very polite. From time to time, some nobles who recognized Dake came to greet him, but Dake dismissed them with a wave of his hand. He didn't have any intention of expanding his social circle, and he wasn't interested in the pretense between the nobles. Jessica's business skills were very strong. Dake and the others had a lot of fun with her company. The service of Soul and Dream was indeed very comfortable. Apart from the luxurious appearance, the expensive luxury goods were also very good in terms of quality. Dake chose a small gift for everyone present, including the elves. It could be said that he was very fair. The 2 maids were flattered and smiled the whole time. To them, the value of the gift was only one thing. The most important thing was that it was a gift from the young master. It would make them the most envied existence among the sisters. About an hour later, the group walked and stopped, and finally arrived at the center of Soul and Dream. The circular corridor around the arena was very wide, and there were high-end sofas and facilities everywhere. The staff of the hall shuttled between the facilities, providing the best service to every guest. Some leaned lazily on the sofa, enjoying a professional massage. Some listened to elegant music and quietly read a book. Some sat around a table and chatted excitedly. The guild hall had used special magical devices to divide the area into borderless areas, allowing every guest to enjoy their private space in an open space. After Dake walked in, Jessica introduced, "This can be said to be the most popular place for guests to interact. The arena in the middle is often used for swordsmanship, horsemanship, or magical duels." "A magical duel exhibition?" Dake was suddenly interested and asked, "Is there one today?" Jessica replied without hesitation, "There's one tonight. It's an exhibition match between a famous duelist known as the Butterfly Maiden and a professional duelist trained by the hall." Dake said, "To be able to invite a famous duelist, the appearance fee should be quite high, right?" Jessica revealed a look of envy. "Millions." "Just $1 million? I thought it would be at least 10 million. As Dake was speaking, he suddenly noticed a familiar person watching a horsemanship show in the arena. "Isn't that Senior Jeffrey? 2 and 1 4000 plus, 102/233. Please vote." Chapter 492. The youth sitting in front of the guardrail had a head of slightly brownish blonde hair that reached his shoulders. His bangs were neat, his nose was high, and his lips were slightly plump. His appearance could be considered decent. However, his shoulders were very wide, and he wasn't tall. His upper body was too wide, and his lower body was too short. It wasn't very harmonious. And this noble youth was the president of the Noble History Research Society, Angus Jeffrey. After leaving the school, Angus Jeffrey didn't have that group of caring members around him, but he seemed to have gained a few more fans that he didn't know. His father, Count Jeffrey, was one of the 36 counselors of the kingdom, which indeed gave him a very high status. Outside the school, he was still surrounded by stars. However, Dake wasn't familiar with him, so he casually glanced at him and prepared to walk away. However, a noble youth beside Jeffrey noticed him and knocked on Jeffrey's shoulder with a mischievous look. Then he moved closer to Jeffrey's ear and said something. Jeffrey instantly turned his head and swept the back of his head across the youth's tall nose. If there was a prosthesis inside, it should be crooked, */omega \**. Jeffrey's expression instantly stiffened. Then he chose to ignore the youth and naturally pretended to be familiar with him as he walked towards Dake. Website. https://m. But can't you? VIP. Hey, isn't this dimming? Do you still remember me? I'm the president of the Noble History Research Society, Jeffrey. Senior Jeffrey. Dake could only stop. The magic elves playing behind him also stopped one after another. Jeffrey very subtly glanced at the group of magic elves. His heart sank, but his expression was still warm. No matter how much he hated Dake in his heart, he still had to do some face work. In the school, both sides were students. But outside of the school, one was the son of a count, and the other was the son of a duke. Even if Jeffrey's father had real power, it couldn't make up for the superficial difference in class. And the factions of the first prince and princess were far from the point of falling out. Jeffrey very warmly invited Dake to sit down. He opened his mouth and said, "I've been on vacation for more than a month. I thought I would meet you sooner." Dake put the magician's secretary on the table and smiled slightly. "My family is quite strict. I've been forced to study during this period." Teaching more strictly at home? When the nobles around Jeffrey heard this, they didn't react. After a while, a noble girl couldn't help but laugh. "Little dimming brother, if your family is strict." Dark turned his head slightly and asked, "Who is this?" The noble girl smiled faintly, and a deep dimple appeared on her fair cheeks. Of course, and her eyes, and of course, her face was slightly round, her eyes were very big, and her eyelashes were especially long. Her nose bridge was not high, but it was small and exquisite. Coupled with her rosy cherry lips, she gave people the feeling of a delicate doll. Of S's, it's ants. SSSSSSSS. She wore a pair of high-heeled red dancing shoes. In response to Dake's question, the noble girl covered her face with a folding fan and said, "Phyllis Raman, Earl Rex Raman is my father." Earl Rex Raman. Dake's mind spun. He was sure that he didn't know who Earl Rex Raman was. But it didn't matter. He opened his arms and leaned on the sofa. He said lazily, "Sister Phyllis, just call me Dake. Today is different from the past. I can't go back to the era where I could do whatever I wanted." "Why? Did you fail in school?" Phyllis Rahman asked curiously. It was probably because of Dark's earlier mention of tutoring that gave her this idea. But when she said this, Angus Jeffrey's mouth twitched. He couldn't help but say, "Phyllis Dimming is. Dake is the first in the grade." Deanna's eyes widened. She immediately refuted. "This is Deanna, right?" Phyllis Rahman covered her mouth with a folding fan to hide her surprise. Of course, Angus Jeffrey wouldn't brag about Dake Diming's results to them. In fact, he didn't even mention Dake at all. Therefore, the noble children in this small circle didn't know that he didn't have a good relationship with Dake Dimming. Based on their instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages, no one wanted to provoke an opponent with such a strong background. Phyllis even wanted to use her looks and gender advantage to create a good impression in front of Dake. After all, there were many paths and many choices. Although the noble children seemed to be carefree, many times, they couldn't help themselves. So when the legendary and incompetent Valkyrie's son suddenly became a top student, the group of noble children were surprised and immediately complimented him. Although Jeffrey was in the middle, he suddenly felt that this circle had become unfamiliar. His forehead was faintly twitching, but on the surface he had to congratulate Dake with the others for being the first in the grade. In order to regain the initiative, he changed the topic and said, "Speaking of which, since Dimming is the first in the grade, after becoming the second year, he will be the chief student. He just needs to apply to the professor, and he can easily become the second year's prefect. After all, the second year doesn't have many standards to refer to, and it has always been based on results." "Second year's prefect?" Dake smiled. "That's too troublesome. Whoever wanted to be the prefect could be the prefect." "There are many benefits to becoming a prefect," Jeffrey said with a smile. Jeffrey said with a smile on his face. "The professors will open up some privileges for the class leaders, and teach them some magic card crafting methods that the class leaders will use, such as the silence. But you can still learn without becoming a prefect." Dake shook his head and said, "The professors are always happy to satisfy the student's curiosity." "That's a good student," Jeffrey corrected. Dake couldn't help but smile. "But am I not a good student?" Jeffrey was stunned for a moment, then he laughed dryly. "That's true, haha." Both parties got along surprisingly well. Deanna and Aurora sat next to Dake. Katrina stood behind them. Under the lead of the vampire's daughter, the magic elves leaned against the edge of the guardrail to watch the equestrian performance in the arena. There were two actors in the arena, a woman and a man. Both of them were wearing tight-fitting gymnastics clothes, revealing a large area of skin. The woman had heavy makeup and a graceful figure. The man had short hair and sword-like eyebrows, looking valiant. Their mounts were two white tigers with slanted eyes. The two actors and the two big cats' performances were very tacit and exciting, and the magic elves couldn't take their eyes off them. After watching for a while, the vampire's daughter couldn't help but look at the green-eyed baby dragon. There were no tigers at home, only cats. But if one couldn't ride a tiger, one could ride a dragon. Although the green-eyed baby dragon was a baby dragon, it was at least 3 meters tall and could be ridden. Hiss! Green-eyed baby shuddered violently and looked around suspiciously. Although it was refined from the fruit of pride, the green-eyed baby dragon had always been very obedient since it was born, and had never shown an arrogant attitude. Sometimes it didn't even look like a dragon. But it was also because of this that the vampire's daughter's arrogance grew. Wow! The equestrian performance in the arena suddenly entered an exciting moment. The onlookers couldn't help but exclaim. The magic elves' eyes also lit up as they watched the two actors ride the two tigers and do all kinds of incredible movements, and they couldn't take their eyes off them. At the same time, Dake saw Deanna looking over there from time to time, so he smiled and said, "Why don't we go and take a look?" "Sure." Jeffrey naturally had no reason to disagree. Today was obviously not a good time to pick a fight, and it was also a good opportunity to have more contact with Dake Dimming and explore his actual situation. So the group also came in front of the glass guardrail and watched the equestrian performance, happily and harmoniously. But the exciting moments were always short. After only 3 minutes, the equestrian performance came to an end. Dake asked with a little regret. "What's the next performance?" Jeffrey said. "Next should be a swordsmanship performance." "Swordsmanship performance?" Dake thought for a while and asked. "Is it a double swordsmanship performance?" Jeffrey shook his head and said, "There is a double swordsmanship performance, but today should be the show of the hero slaying the dragon." The hero fighting the evil dragon? Dake couldn't help but be curious. Jeffrey said slowly, "As you think, it's the classic show of the hero fighting the evil dragon. In this world, the hero and the evil dragon, the hero and the demon king, these were all topics that had lasted for a long time. With this as the center, there were as many literary works as there were stars in the sky, and there were also many that were adapted into operas. But the people in this world liked this. Of course, in recent years, the show of the hero and the demon king was more popular than the show of the hero and the evil dragon. In fact, when the Holy Church publicly announced the execution ceremony, all the major theaters were trying to show shows related to the hero and the demon king. This soul-haunting and dream-winding Guildhall was no exception. Therefore, the show of the hero fighting the evil dragon was pushed to the daytime when there were fewer people. But this didn't mean that it wasn't exciting. After Dake learned the name of the show, he couldn't help but turn to look at his magic guide sprites and smile. Among his magic guide fairies, not only did he have 2 magic guide fairies with hero quality, but he also had a genuine dragon species. If they were to act in this show, it should be true to its name, right? Just as he was thinking this, the swordsman acting as the hero had already taken the stage. It was a beautiful swordswoman dressed as a man. Every step she took was in the rhythm of the background music, and the enchanted longsword emitted dazzling starlight. The music in the arena gradually became louder, and the beast pen in the west suddenly opened. A rock dragon that looked like it was made of stone rushed out with a roar, and the dragon's aura instantly exploded. Although it was only a dragon subspecies, the rock dragon was still close to 5 meters long, and the dragon's aura that burst out made people feel terrified. The background music became more and more passionate, and the swordsman acting as the hero leaped up like a gust of wind, her feet dancing in the air with a gorgeous sword dance. The blade of the demonic sword in his hand slashed open the stone dragon's forehead, causing it to fly into a rage. Hidden under the surface of the show, this hero fighting the evil dragon swordsmanship performance couldn't escape the essence of a beast fight. But in order to take care of the audience's hearts, the beast in the beast fight chose the rock dragon that wouldn't spill blood. The elegant music, gorgeous swordsmanship, and the violence displayed during the beast fight fully attracted the attention of the nobles. Even Dake couldn't help but pay attention. There was no doubt about the strength of the swordswoman in the arena. The terrifying-looking rock dragon was completely controlled by her fingers, and could only be reduced to a prop for the swordsmanship performance. Such a powerful magic swordswoman was really amazing. When she finally beheaded the rock dragon on the spot with her gorgeous dance steps, the railings of the circular corridor suddenly burst into enthusiastic cheers. Dake narrowed his eyes slightly, but noticed that the rock dragon's claws trembled imperceptibly. He couldn't help but have a startled thought. Could it be that this rock dragon is a reusable item? Some elemental life forms weren't afraid of being cut by swords, and even if they were cut into pieces, they could still recover. This rock dragon might be a half-elemental life form, but if you thought about it carefully, you would find that this made sense. Otherwise, if a dragon subspecies had to be used for each performance, wouldn't the cost soar? In the end, it's still an act. Dake came to a conclusion, but when the swordswoman stepped on the rock dragon's corpse, she suddenly raised her sword and pointed it at the audience. This extremely abrupt action instantly silenced the surrounding voices. Everyone looked in the direction of the sword tip, and curiously turned their gazes. Dake's location instantly became the focus of attention. What is she doing? Dake couldn't help but frown. Beside him, the corners of Jeffrey's mouth curled up as he said happily, "She's challenging you." Dake was puzzled. There's such a thing in a swordsmanship performance? Jeffrey smiled. This is a dreamlike rule. Regardless of whether it's horsemanship, swordsmanship, or magic duels after the performance, the the performer can point to an expert who isn't weaker than them to challenge. If they win, the performer will receive a handsome reward. How do you judge someone who isn't weaker than them? Dake asked curiously. Jeffrey said, it depends on how exciting the battle is. If it's not exciting enough, it won't be considered a victory. Dake asked, the hall has the power of interpretation? Although Jeffrey was surprised by Dake's quick thinking, he still nodded. You can say that. Dake then asked, then, what if I don't accept her challenge? Jeffrey couldn't help but laugh. Apart from a few indecent nicknames, it's not a big deal. Also, if the performer challenges a noble, the noble can let his subordinates do it. In addition, magisters like us can even summon magic elves to enter the arena. I see. Dake then turned his head to look at his magic elves and asked, who wants to go down and meet her? When this question was asked, the Dilu beast's ears perked up and it became restless. The warlike Hawkman wrestling was also eager to give it a try. The lion beast had already pressed down on the hilt of the Lion King pill. Clearly, it was ready to respond to its master's request. But when Dake was choosing between the magic elves, Trina, who was standing behind him, casually said, young master, I'll go. Dake's gaze swept back and forth between the lion beast and the Dilu beast. Finally, he made a decision. Quickly return. Yes, young master. A cold light flashed in Trina's eyes. After the performance, there was indeed a rule that allowed the performer to challenge others. And this kind of rule would often make the atmosphere even more intense. But those who understood that in this kind of situation, there was usually something arranged first. Like this kind of unforeseen challenge. If it wasn't the performer acting on her own, then it was someone who gave her instructions. And the person who could instruct soul captivation must have a high status. Who could it be? Trina's gaze was cold as she looked around. But other than Angus Jeffrey's group, she didn't find anyone suspicious. Clang! The swordswoman in the arena suddenly waved her sword and provoked her again. Trina sneered in her heart and said to Dake, go, I'll be right back. As soon as she finished speaking, her figure flashed and she directly jumped down from above. She crushed the corpse of the rock dragon with one foot. The swordswoman's expression suddenly changed, and her eyes became incomparably solemn. She seemed to be surprised by Trina's appearance. But at this point, she could only go all out. The battle between the two sides was on the verge of breaking out, and the atmosphere instantly became anxious. Two great forces suddenly surged out. One was as majestic and domineering as a lion king, while the other was as bewitching and strange as a colorful snake. Trina's sword force was fully unleashed as soon as she attacked. The Lion King's force gathered on the sword and turned into a terrifying aura. Although the swordswoman also blocked with her force, the gap between the two sides was completely exposed after just one round of exchange. How could a swordswoman who was subservient to performing in the arena fight against a swordswoman who was personally taught by the Valkyrie? The gap between the two sides was like a natural chasm. The majestic Lion King's force crushed the Viper force and ended the battle with an unstoppable momentum. When the swordswoman was mercilessly stomped under Trina's foot, the applause in the corridor was thunderous. Humph! She snorted coldly, and her figure flashed back to Dake's side. But amidst the thunderous applause, Angus Jeffrey, who was on the other side of Dake, broke out in a cold sweat. He held a small ball of paper in his hand, and his gaze was erratic. Not long after Trina left the arena, someone very naturally walked to his side and handed him a piece of paper. The paper didn't need to be opened. As soon as his finger touched it, a voice entered his ears. It was the voice of the eldest prince, Charles. No matter how unwilling Jeffrey was, he didn't dare to disobey the eldest prince's order. But he couldn't figure out what the eldest prince was thinking. Was it a coincidence to set up a trap for his opponent's son? Or was there a secret that he hadn't touched upon? But his expression changed, and he had already regained his enthusiasm. Junior, since the atmosphere is so lively, why don't you and I have a duel? 5000 plus. Continue after waking up. I suddenly realized that the number of words updated this month has exceeded the previous monthly record. This author is obviously super salty, but he's working too hard. Chapter 493. The weather is good today. Why don't we have a duel to liven things up? Dake looked at Geoffrey and felt that this senior was saying something like that. Thus, he didn't take it as a formal invitation and asked casually, "Is it a magician duel?" "Of course." A natural smile appeared on Geoffrey's face. "We're magicians." Dake smiled. "But senior, you're a fourth year, and I'm only a first year. If you accidentally lose to me, how can you go out and meet people in the future?" Geoffrey's heart was sweating, but he smiled and said, "It's just for entertainment." Dake shook his head. "But other people won't think so." Geoffrey gritted his teeth. "You're a first year and I'm a fourth year. How can I lose?" Dake smiled. "I'm just worried about you." Geoffrey said, "Thank you so much." In fact, based on the strength that Dake had shown in the last competition, he was confident that he would win. Remember the URL. MVIP, can't you? 6. Just like Dake said, he was a fourth-year student. Even if he wasn't good at duels, he had the resources of the Aristocratic History Research Society, and couldn't be too weak. Furthermore, this time he had followed the eldest prince's instructions to duel with Dark in this hall. If he really lost, then the news would spread like wildfire among the nobles. Thus, he was confident that he would win, even though the first prince didn't ask him to win the duel. So why was the first prince doing this? Geoffrey couldn't say anything. He wasn't someone who was willing to charge and break through enemy lines. In a secret room in the hall, First Prince Charles was drinking the strong liquor he got from the dwarf tribe. He was in a bad mood. The Holy Church's upcoming execution ceremony for the Demon King wasn't within his control. When the Holy Church was discussing this matter, they even excluded him. This gave him a clearer understanding of the depth of the alliance between him and the Holy Church. After all, both sides were working together for a win-win situation and weren't united. They couldn't possibly be united. And since he couldn't completely rely on the Holy Church, he had to find someone more trustworthy. But to be on par with the Valkyrie, at the very least, it had to be at the level of Grand Magus Niels Bohr and Grand Duke Transiglinton. In addition, the military forces must also do their best to fight for it. But last month, he had just received the bad news that the giant bear family was leaning toward the Valkyrie, and the olive branch he extended to the Dolan family was not immediately accepted. The current situation could be said to be a wall for him everywhere. It was difficult for him to interfere with the Saint Sect's schemes, even though the Archbishop had promised that if he succeeded, he would share the credit with him. But what if he failed? Now that the First Princess faction was using this matter as an excuse to set up defenses all over the royal capital, he was like an outsider who had nothing to do. All he could do was drink here, drowning his sorrows. That kind of feeling was hard to describe. Why can Elisha gain the Valkyrie's trust but I can't? Is it because she's a woman? The first prince became more and more irritated. He gulped down a large mouthful of strong wine and then choked on it, coughing nonstop. His face was blood red. In the current imperial city, the Valkyrie was at the peak of both power, prestige, and personal strength. Only the saint, who had a deep foundation, could go against them. If other forces wanted to occupy a place, they had to unite. For example, the court Grand Magus Niels Bohr and Grand Duke Transiglinton had joined forces. But these were not important. If Charles wanted to find a group of supporters, he could still find a group of them. But those old guys all had their own ulterior motives. Looking for them was undoubtedly cutting off his own flesh, and the gains did not make up for the losses. In other words, there was no one as pure as the Valkyrie. No, I have to think of a way. The first prince was drunk and couldn't help but think of the blonde boy. As the Valkyrie's most doted only son, Dake Deming was indeed a very good entry point. If he could be roped in, it would inevitably weaken the resistance brought by the Valkyrie. Therefore, the Archbishop had previously thought of recruiting him as the Holy Son, and using a conciliatory strategy. But the appearance of the little demon beast made this idea die midway. Then Dake showed the possibility of being conferred the title of Hero Candidate at the Easter Duel Festival. But the identity of hero was two sides of the same coin. It represented infinite glory. It also carried the curse of fate. Charles had always been considering whether to invest in the previous hero's son, the White Gouda. After all, the hero was useful and not easy to backfire on. After all, Hero's short life was not a secret in the core circle. But before this, he had always focused on the hero's glory and neglected the hero's fate. There was nothing in the world that could not be used. Charles suddenly had an idea. What if he promoted Dake Dimming as the hero? Would the Valkyrie be too busy to care about the situation? Once this idea came up, he could not stop it. Let's confirm it again. Charles looked at Dake Dimming in the circular corridor, and the group of Dilu beasts among the magic elves, and his heart was in turmoil. After that, the swordswoman who played the role of the hero challenged Dake Dimming under his instructions. Charles originally thought that Dake would send a sword magic elf to replace him. But he didn't expect that in the end, it wasn't the Dilu beast or the lion beast, but Dake's maid. However, this little accident was nothing. Charles immediately sent someone to pass a message to Angus Jeffrey. Jeffrey's family was completely bound to his ship, and they could be considered one of his own. He shouldn't be unwilling to let his own people help him, right? Charles fed himself a special sobriety pill. This was the same type of sobering medicine that Sister Ka Lien prepared for him at Christmas. After drinking a pill, no matter how drunk he was, he would be able to wake up instantly, even though the price was double the drunkenness. But since he had to lie flat anyway, wouldn't it still be the same if he lied double? Therefore, this sobering medicine was very popular in the noble circle. Angus is a fourth-year student after all. He should win, right? Charles recalled Angus's resume and muttered to himself. In this haunted by dreams clubhouse, it wasn't rare for a noble to personally participate in a duel. Although the war had ended, the older people still had a persistence to fight in their bones. That martial spirit didn't disappear with the arrival of peace. Therefore, when a noble participated in a duel, not only would it not be considered rude, but it would also be seen as brave. Of course, the treatment of the loser and the winner was completely different. Especially a duel between a fourth-year student and a first-year student like Jeffrey and Dake. Even if it was just for fun, once they lost, their reputation would be ruined. Dake purely felt that it wasn't necessary, so he reminded them. But since Jeffrey was so confident, then they wouldn't go easy on him in a duel. He didn't reject Jeffrey's invitation but chose to agree. It's a good time to warm up. I've been cooped up in the mansion for too long. Dake made a caressing gesture to Katrina. Katrina nodded slightly, having no objections to Dake's decision. In this duel with a huge difference in age, as a first-year young master, even if he really lost, there wouldn't be any negative effects. Moreover, she didn't think that the young master would lose. Anyone who had interacted with the young master's magic elves for a period of time probably wouldn't think so, right? Only Aurora, who didn't know much about the strength of the Shungmalian fourth-year students, asked Deanna worriedly. Deanna thought for a moment and said, although that senior is a fourth-year student, he doesn't seem to have participated in any duels, so I'm not too sure. But he shouldn't be very strong, right? Aurora frowned and said, but if he's not strong, why did he invite Dake to a duel? Deanna thought carefully again and guessed. Maybe his hands are itchy? My hands are often itchy too. Dake looked at the intimate way they were discussing together, and couldn't help but shake his head. Jeffrey was obviously a person who didn't wake up early for no reason. This duel invitation clearly had other motives. But it was precisely because the other party came with a motive that they had the motivation to win. It's been a long time since I last had a duel. Dake clapped his hands. The magic elves, who had been waiting for a long time, turned into rays of light one after another. They drilled into his portable card bag. Some people who didn't know much about magic technology suddenly realized that this group of magical animals were actually magic elves. In the blink of an eye, only the vampire's daughter and Phoenix girl were left beside Dake. After all, the vampire's daughter was going to enter the school, so it wasn't suitable to leave too much of an impression that she was related to the magic elves. Dake didn't mind revealing her identity, but it was very likely that this identity would cause her to be treated coldly at the beginning of the school. It would be better if she could only reveal her identity after she integrated into the group. As a parent, Dake certainly hoped that she could have a normal school life. But it was still too early to think about this. After Dake left the vampire's daughter here, he followed the maid's guidance and walked to a protrusion in the circular corridor. Upon closer inspection, one would find that there were 2 protrusions in the circular corridor that could be used as a platform for the contestants. This design, no one knew if it was intentional or not. In short, Dake and Jeffrey quickly arrived at the 2 protrusions. Then, the maids on both sides pressed a button, and a card table actually rose from the floor. "I need a bit of time." Dark activated the card table and used the loudspeaker to speak to Senior Jeffrey, who was sitting opposite him. Jeffrey naturally wouldn't refuse. Thus, Dake took out the deck and replenished his mana one by one. Because there was no partition at the back of the platform, Deanna and the others also walked over. On the other side, many people had gathered around Jeffrey. Everyone was in high spirits, and there wasn't any hostile atmosphere. It was as if it was really just an exchange of entertainment. However, as the 2 drew closer, more and more people noticed the commotion and came over to watch. The so-called entertainment was bound to not be true entertainment. Angus Jeffrey was a frequent customer of Haunted by Dreams. Most of the noblemen and women who lingered here knew him. Even if Jeffrey didn't have his father's identity as a background, he was also a very outstanding person. Not only was he a 4th-year student who was admitted by the Shungmalian Academy, but he was also the president of a large club that mainly consisted of noble children. All of these made him very popular in the hearts of others. Thus, when they saw that Angus Jeffrey was dueling, many people couldn't help but curiously look to the other side. Once they saw it, they couldn't take their eyes off it. Although it was Dake Diming's first time here, who among the nobles who could come to Haunted by Dreams, especially those who were older, didn't recognize his face. It could be said that Dake himself was a moving tag. His face was as well known as his character. "Isn't that Yvette's son? Why is he here?" "I heard that he was also invited by the Shungmalian Academy. It's been almost a year, right? 4th-year students versus 1st-year students? Is this a teaching match? I didn't expect that naughty child from back then to be so big now. He looks like a gentleman. I heard that he just turned 13 last month." The Pearl of the Great Bayer family was also invited to their family's private dinner party. The Pearl of the Great Bayer family. Are you talking about the one over there? Over there? Which one? Well, I can't tell which one is it. What's going on? How did the Pearl of the Great Bayer family become 2? Before the onlookers' idle chatter could reach the sky, Dake finally finished replenishing his mana. Then he began to methodically construct his card deck. In a regular duel, both sides' default magic sphere of life enchantment was level 4, 8,000 points, and the number of cards in a deck was at least 40 cards. After the Easter Duel Festival, Dake hadn't properly constructed a deck. Since he had the chance today, he casually made one. First, he added all the magic elf cards into the deck. Excluding Daughter of the Vampire, there are a total of 16 magic elf cards. Magic Beast, Ibu, Magic Beast, Changeable Monster, Trash Slime, Curse Cage, Little Demon Beast, Ball Sea Lion, Secretary of the Sorcerer's Library, Kettle Kettle, Hawkman Wrestler, Meow Meow, Dream Demon, Dilu Beast, Milkkin, Ibu the Fairy, Single Sword Scabbard, Lion Beast, Primordial Dragon's Egg. Then, I'll add in the necessary Great Sin cards. Pride I, Pride 2 Old, Pride 2 New, Greed 2, Pride 3, Bliss 3, Greed 3, Bliss 3 Moon, Bliss 3 Moon Improved, Bliss 3 Moon Improved. Then, I'll add in 4 armed cards. Wishful Dice, Moon God Soul-Eye, Sour Plum Superman, Lightbringer. Then I'll add in 3 magic cards. Fusion, Flight Spell, Zoo. Finally, I'll add in all the magic cards and item cards that I can use to make a total of 40 cards. Flicker Spell, Energy Potion, Energy Potion, Energy Potion, Silence Potion, Reveal Powder. With this, the construction of the deck is considered complete. Dake smiled slightly. Even though the construction of this deck didn't require much skill, it was at least more comfortable than any of the previous decks, because there were almost no more magic cards left to make up the numbers. After refining 3 more magic elven cards, he could still replace the 3 energy potions. If there were more important occasions, he could also add in Vampire's Daughter to increase the strength. At that time, he would truly have his first complete set of cards. With this deck as the foundation, he could continue to develop other card series. For example, Pride, Bliss, Armed, and so on. Maybe he could even develop an entertainment deck with Wishful Dice and Sour Plum Superman as the core. After all, the spiritual core of the Magic Duel was to make people smile. I'm looking forward to the next 3 Magic Elven cards. But for now, I'll focus on the duel and try out the strength of this basic deck. Dark folded the 40 Magic cards neatly and placed them into the card slot on the card table. He then said to Angus Jeffrey, "Senior Jeffrey, I'm ready for now." "That's good." Jeffrey took a deep breath. He noticed that Dake's deck was more powerful than during the Easter Duel Festival. And Dake didn't put in Vampire's Daughter and Phoenix's Daughter, who should be high-star magic elves, into the deck, which made him feel pressured. Generally speaking, there was only one reason for this behavior. The existing deck didn't need to add high-star magic elves to be strong enough. "Jeffrey, you can do it, right?" Felix Rahman keenly noticed the subtle change in Jeffrey's expression and asked casually. As the daughter of Earl Rahman, who was also one of the 32 counselors, although Phyllis didn't like to stand out, her status in this small circle was not inferior to Jeffrey's. And Jeffrey, of course, couldn't say that he couldn't do it. He nodded and said solemnly, "In the Shungmalian Academy, there is a threshold between the 3rd and 4th years. My Magic Elven level is definitely above his, but his Magic Elven is a bit special." Phyllis was surprised. "I thought you would win. If you lose, won't you have to crawl away? Speaking of which, what are you after?" "I can't help it." Jeffrey sighed in his heart. He also wanted to ask, what was he after? But not everyone could be as unscrupulous as Dake Dimung. Standing at a height that is neither too high nor too low, you could be pushed down at any time. If you don't climb up, others will surpass you. After targeting Dake so many times without success, he had learned his lesson. Although this didn't make him give up on using him as an imaginary enemy, he could have done it more carefully and secretly. Unfortunately, when he hid his weapon in the forest, he was forced to reveal it himself. Regardless of the outcome of this duel, it would do him more harm than good. Unless he could use this to gain the first prince's trust, then the benefits would cover up the harm. In other words, he was already standing on the edge of a cliff where he could only win and not lose. "Let's begin." Jeffrey put the deck into the slot and gave it his all. 2. 5 and 1/5/100 plus. 103/233. Evening time, last few days of May. Votes will expire if you don't vote. Is identical to Omega is identical to. Chapter 494. Both sides were ready. The card table was activated, and the cards were shuffled automatically. There was no referee or commentator for this duel, but a magician's duel only needed a card table. As the magician's projection appeared in the air, the duel officially entered the preparation stage. When the cards were shuffled, a 30-second countdown appeared on the right side of the preparation stage. The atmosphere at the scene became tense with the appearance of the countdown. The onlookers could not help but lower their voices in discussion. Prince Charles stared at the arena. He only wanted to see the silhouette of the Dilu beast or the lion beast holding the holy sword. As for the sudden flash of inspiration, Dake Dimming was praised as a hero. After taking the special sobriety medicine, Charles immediately woke up and quickly suppressed this thought. If he really did that, and succeeded in doing so, he was afraid that one day he would suddenly disappear while walking on the road. 1 second to remember https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. But this idea was not wrong. It was just that there was a problem of degree. In other words, he could think of a way to create such a trend, but he could not let it happen. As long as Dake Dimming maintained a state of high possibility of becoming a hero, he could attract the Valkyrie's attention to the greatest extent. But this degree was very difficult to grasp. Charles quickly organized his thoughts. His eyes did not leave the arena. On the arena, Dake and Jeffrey had already drawn 5 magicians' cards from the shuffled deck. Both sides had different expressions, but they had already focused their attention on the duel itself. 30 seconds was actually a very short time. Every time he was distracted, Precious thinking time would be wasted. If the final exam doesn't count, it has been more than 3 months since the last official duel, right? Dake's mind skipped over this thought and looked at the 5 magicians' cards in his hand. Meow Meow, Magical Beast, Ibu Hawkman Wrestling, Dilu Beast, First Dragon Egg, 5 magicians' cards. Dake was slightly stunned by the situation that he had never encountered before. On the other hand, the corner of Angus Jeffrey's mouth raised slightly. He suddenly looked up at Dake. The spectators who were carefully watching the two suddenly had a thought. They subconsciously felt that the young master of the Dimming Duke's family had likely drawn the Joker card. Some of the people who did not have a good relationship with the Dimming family could not help but sneer in their hearts. As for the Valkyrie's existence, they could not help but feel nervous. Even if this was a teaching match between the 4th and 1st years, the Valkyrie's admirers, the Valkyrie's child would not lose too badly. At least he should at least show some resistance. It was still acceptable for them to be defeated after trying their best to resist. The onlookers all had different expressions, but Dark Diamond wasn't affected in the slightest. In fact, he was only surprised. He was not disappointed that he had drawn 5 magicians' cards. This starting magical elf card had the top 3-star magical elf card of the 1st tier, Meow Meow, as well as the 2 core cards of the deck, Illusory Beast, Ibu, and Diru Beast, and even his newest trump card, Primordial Dragon Egg. No matter how one looked at it, this was an extremely lucky draw. Dake did not hesitate at all. He pressed his finger on the trump card. Facing the 4th-year senior Jeffrey, he did not think that he had the ability to hold back. What he needed to do was to summon a high-star magician's spirit as quickly as possible in the 1st round. Then he would give his opponent the fastest and fiercest blow. The 30-second countdown passed in the blink of an eye. Tick. When the countdown reached 0, the familiar sound of the turn changing sounded. Dake did not hesitate to draw First Dragon Egg and cast his usual summoning spell as quickly as possible. And what he saw with his eyes. Angus Jeffrey, who was on the opposite platform, did not say anything. The moment the turn changed, he began to summon loudly. In the name of Dake Dimming, magicians summon First Dragon Egg. In the name of Angus Jeffrey, magicians summon Frigid Plains Desert. In just 3 seconds, both sides had already compressed the casting time of their usual summoning spells to the limit. Usually, the summons landed almost at the same time. Then a whistling sound like a ghost's cry swept over. The surrounding chill caused the summer heat to dissipate in an instant. The onlookers near Jeffrey subconsciously retreated. The freezing wind from Frigid Plains Desert, which Jeffrey had shown, blew towards the arena that had been changed into a duel arena. Almost instantly, Jeffrey's summoning area, the red team's summoning area, was covered in a thick layer of ice. After the ice covered the red team's summoning area, it spread all the way. In the blink of an eye, it covered half of the duel arena. It's actually a field card. Jeffrey's field card was a surprise to everyone. Although it did not reach the level of heaven and earth change, this Frigid Plains Desert was still visually pleasing. At this moment, in Dake's summoning area, the blue team's summoning area, a huge dragon egg had also appeared. The dragon species had not yet hatched, but it had already naturally emitted a faint dragon's aura. It allowed the knowledgeable people to immediately recognize that this was a dragon egg. Since ancient times, the dragon race, which was innately able to compete with the high-level demons, had always been synonymous with the strong in the human world. However, those who had a little understanding of magic would immediately realize the fact that the ice element countered the dragon element. Although the element countered in this world would not be exaggerated to the extent of double damage, countered was still countered. On this Frigid Plains Desert, the dragon element magic fairy was destined to not be able to exert its full strength. Jeffrey clearly knew the existence of the young blue-eyed dragon. How could he not be on guard? During the 3-second cooldown after both sides completed their first summoning, Dake immediately injected a huge amount of magic power into the primordial dragon egg. The dragon egg, which had absorbed enough magic power, immediately began to hatch. The light that shot out from the cracks was snow-white and pure. The young blue-eyed dragon fiercely broke open the eggshell. and a tender roar resounded throughout the hall. The faint dragon's aura that was emitted when it was still a dragon egg was highly condensed at that moment, suppressing the entire place. The onlookers were shocked by this aura and were slightly shocked. However, the frigid plains desert had already spread to the feet of the young blue-eyed dragon. The whistling cold wind blew on the scales of the young blue-eyed dragon, causing it to shiver uncontrollably, and its aura was interrupted. Seeing this, a faint smile appeared on Jeffrey's face. However, his hands did not stop at all, and the second magic card was already at his fingertips. The incubation of the young blue-eyed dragon took about 3 seconds, which was enough for the cooldown of its usual summoning spells to be completed. As for the summoning of the second magic card, it only took 3 seconds. Within these 3 seconds, Dake was not in a hurry to summon. Instead, he gave the first order to the young blue-eyed dragon. Young blue-eyed dragon, let the light shine on the earth, hall of light. Roar. The young green-eyed dragon responded, and the holy white light that erupted from its suddenly extended dragon wings blocked the encroaching cold air. The rich white light gathered rapidly on top of its head, condensing into a blazing ball of light that was like the sun. The snow-white wings fluttered down from the sky. The sudden explosion of the ball of light caused the surrounding environment to change rapidly. The invasion of the frigid plains desert was blocked and forced back at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. The ice on the field shattered and melted, and in the blink of an eye, it had already returned to the other half of the field. Bathed in the warm white light of the Hall of Light, the young blue-eyed dragon, which had recovered to its best state, flapped its wings and flew towards the red half of the field without needing Dake's order. The field effect was forced back to the other half of the field, causing the smile on Jeffrey's face to freeze slightly. However, his second summoning spell had already been completed. As if to increase his momentum, he suddenly raised the second magic card up high and shouted, "Awaken! The undead that hibernates in the frigid plains, the ferocious behemoth that hibernates under the frigid plains, giant fiend of Li Yuan." Crack! Cracks appeared on the ice surface of the red field, and the cold air burst out from the cracks like a spring. A huge summoning circle peeked out from under the ice, and the icy blue light was dazzling. A wisp of ghost-like soul rolled up in the summoning circle, and layers of ice crystals covered it, and the cold air eroded the entire field. Roar! The ferocious roar reverberated in the air. A terrifying monster with snow-white long hair and a body like a giant ape appeared in the fierce wind. The giant fiend of Li Yuan was more than 4 meters tall, and its 2 arms were as thick as buckets. Its back was hunched and bulged backward, and its face was covered by extremely thick white hair, revealing only 2 scarlet eyes. Giant Fiend of Li Yuan, Een Fiend Ice Claw. After the Giant Fiend of Li Yuan was summoned, it immediately followed Jeffrey's order, and rushed towards the attacking young green-eyed dragon. Its hands were wrapped with extremely cold air at a speed visible to the naked eye. The cold air was actually mixed with dirty black gas, causing its claws to not only have the ice attribute, but also the ghost attribute. The cold air emitted from the frigid plains seeped into its body, causing its 3 attributes to be increased. The 5-star magic fairy, Giant Fiend of Li Yuan, forced the young green-eyed dragon to stop in the air, and both sides began to fight fiercely on the ground. Card name, Giant Fiend of Li Yuan. Type, Fairy card. Level, Race, Undying Species. Attribute, Ice Spectre. Magic power, 2500 attack, 2500 defense, 1200. Ultimate skills, Een Fiend Ice Claw, Hibernating Cold Undead Curse, a dual attribute Undying Species with 3 ultimate skills. This Giant Fiend of Li Yuan was no doubt Jeffrey's trump card at a certain time. The special summoning method that was uncommon in the 1st to 3rd years was considered a basic course in the 4th years. Jeffrey directly skipped the first step, relying on the Frigid Plains venue card and the Giant Fiend of Li Yuan S-Chain to summon a 5-star magic fairy. This should have been a powerful method that was enough to crush the junior students. However, Dake Dimming had used a special method to summon a 6-star magic fairy, Young Green-Eyed Dragon, before him. It had to be said that this was completely out of Jeffrey's expectations. But he did not panic. So what if it's a 6-star? With the attribute Restraint and the Frigid Plains, S3 attributes increase on the Ice attribute Magic Fairy, The giant fiend of Liyuan has the upper hand. The corners of Jeffrey's eyes twitched, and he forced himself to be confident. Only a moment later, the giant fiend of Liyuan, which theoretically should be able to suppress the young green-eyed dragon, was grabbed by the arm by the young green-eyed dragon and pulled outwards. Then it suddenly turned around and threw it over its shoulder. Boom! The 4-meter-tall giant body was smashed to the ground, and spiderweb-like cracks appeared on the hard ice ground. The young green-eyed dragon invaded the frigid plains area from the Hall of Light area. It endured the disadvantage of the attribute, and obtained a crushing advantage with pure fighting skills. At the same time, Dake Diming's second magic fairy was summoned a little later. It was a gray-skinned, half-closed 3-star magic fairy that seemed to never wake up. Meow Meow. With the sure kill skill, Deception. Even if Meow Meow was not used for offense and was used for defense, it would still be effective. Dake steadily summoned the magic fairy, and after Meow Meow, it prepared to summon Illusory Beast, Ibu. In the first round, Illusory Beast, Ibu would be summoned. After that, depending on the situation, it could be sacrificed to summon Diru Beast, or it could be evolved using Great Sin card. If it was sacrificed to summon Diru Beast, then within the range of the Hall of Light, Diru Beast would be equivalent to having 2 lives. Dake had a lot of choices, so he was not impatient. After receiving Silver Wolf Knight, Camilla's guidance, Dake's magic fairies not only mastered basic swordsmanship, but also basic fist techniques and fighting skills. The young green-eyed dragon's skills were not outstanding, but facing the giant evil spirit with an intelligence level of 2.0, its skills were enough to give it an advantage. That kind of feeling was like bullying a layman, and the innocent young green-eyed dragon even felt a little apologetic. But it did not show any mercy. After throwing the giant evil spirit to the ground, the young green-eyed dragon pounced on it, using its weight advantage, and elbowed the giant evil spirit's chest. A woo! The giant evil spirit let out a miserable howl, and its chest caved in. Jeffrey, who was also summoning his third magic card, finally could not help but scold. Giant evil spirit, catch it! Hibernation chill. After the giant evil spirit heard the order, its eyes widened, and it forcefully raised its arms to hug the young green-eyed dragon's neck. Then, it suddenly opened its huge mouth and spat out a chill with a hypnotic effect at the young green-eyed dragon. Chirp! The young green-eyed dragon's expression was obviously sleepy. Seeing that it was about to be hypnotized, Dake calmly gave an order. Let anger dispel sleepiness, crush it. Dragon's reverse scale. The reverse scale under the young green-eyed dragon's chin was instantly shattered. 2 in 1 4000 plus, 105 of 233. Try to finish this paragraph tomorrow. I'm too sleepy today, good night. Chapter 495. Dragon's Reverse Scale. The young green-eyed dragon shatters its reverse scale, causing it to enter a state of rage. Its attack will be greatly increased by 50% to 100%, but it will enter a state of confusion. Duration, 3 minutes. Although the effect of the dragon's reverse scale was overbearing, it came at the cost of losing one's rationality. In a state of rage, not only would the young green-eyed dragon attack all opponents within its field of vision, there was also the possibility of self-harm. However, in special situations such as when it was about to be hypnotized, using the rage of the dragon's reverse scale to cover up the hypnosis effect was also a feasible tactic. In reality, Dake had never tried the dragon's reverse scale before. At first, it was because it was rejected from the bottom of its heart due to the lack of environment. Later on, it simply forgot about it. In short, although it sounded very unreliable, today was the first time he ordered the young green-eyed dragon to use the dragon's reverse scale. From the looks of it, the effect was not bad. The black color that overflowed from the corners of its eyes crawled all over its face like scratches, and its green eyes were filled with rage. Roar! https://mvip VIP. Amidst its furious roar, the young green-eyed dragon suddenly opened its arms. From the shattered reverse scale, black waves surged out, spreading towards its 4 limbs like spider silk. The upper part wrapped around the dragon claws from the inside of its arms, causing the dragon claws that were already as sharp as knives to be covered with a layer of destructive energy. It was this layer of fluctuating energy that gave the young green-eyed dragon an additional 50% to 100% attack power, allowing it to unleash a terrifying power of 4,500 to 6,000 points of attack power. That giant fiend was originally a magic fairy that lacked defense. After being slapped by the enraged young green-eyed dragon's claws, it instantly let out a miserable howl, and was actually slapped to death. Roar! The young green-eyed dragon took a step forward, pressing its dragon claws on the giant fiend's body that was rapidly turning into magic power. It raised its head and let out a heaven-shaking roar. The nobles on the circular corridor were intimidated by that power, and couldn't help but feel shocked. Some middle-aged nobles also widened their eyes, their faces full of shock. They completely didn't expect that the first round of the magic duel between the 4th and 1st years would be so intense. Leaving aside the fact that Angus Jeffrey was a 4th-year student, the 1st-year student Dake Dimming had actually summoned an even more powerful 2nd-grade elemental fairy faster than Angus Jeffrey. Although the young green-eyed dragon in the field looked young and tender, the arrogance it displayed was not inferior to an adult dragon species. However, this berserk type of sure kill skill would definitely have negative effects. How would Dake deal with it? The onlookers exclaimed in low voices as they discussed incessantly. However, the situation on the battlefield was changing rapidly. Angus Jeffrey wasn't as flustered as some people had imagined. He even calmly summoned his 2nd magic elf before the end of the 1st round. The magic guide elf quietly appeared in the red team's summoning area, and did not attract too much attention. Because at this very moment, the onlookers suddenly realized that the magic power of the Li Yuan giant fiend had not dissipated after its death. Instead, it still maintained a blurry and complete shape. This familiar scene caused alarm to rise in Dark's heart. However, this type of sure kill skill was originally difficult to dodge, not to mention that the young green-eyed dragon was currently in a state of berserk chaos. Therefore, when the tick sound of the switch quietly sounded, that ball of magic power rushed towards the young green-eyed dragon's face with a ghost-like howl, and instantly entered it. Sure kill skill, Curse of the Dead. The young green-eyed dragon's body suddenly stiffened, and a deathly pale corpse emerged from the inside out. Layers of frost condensed on its scales, and the movement of its 4 limbs became extremely slow at a speed visible to the naked eye. Battle Stage 2. 30s. It's another sure kill skill like the Curse of the Dead. However, Dake's gaze slightly raised and the corners of his mouth curled up instead. This sure kill skill of the Li Yuan giant fiend was obviously a fusion of the ice and ghost elements. It could cause the young green-eyed dragon to mutate. Not only would it become weak, but its body would also be frozen, causing its movement speed to become slower. Once its movement speed was slowed, no matter how high its attack power was, it would be useless if it couldn't touch the opponent. However, the young green-eyed dragon was originally in a state of uncontrollable chaos, so this Curse of the Dead came at the right time. Dake calmly took out 2 new magic cards from the top of the deck. However, as soon as these 2 magic cards were in his hands, his gaze couldn't help but fall onto the red side summoning area, the magic elf that Jeffrey had summoned. That magic elf was extremely inconspicuous at first, just like a snowflake floating in the air. In fact, its initial appearance was just a crystal of snow. However, as time went by, almost every second, that snow crystal would have a few more layers of ice crystal shell. After just a few seconds, it had already become a crystal snowball full of spikes. Then a violent wind suddenly rose. The entire environment of the Li Yuan frozen ground was affected by it. The cold aura turned into a cyclone under the control of a mysterious power, and the temperature of the field dropped further. The half of the field that was originally taken back by the light spiritual hall actually had layers of ice crystals appearing again. The people standing in the circular corridor could even feel the extreme coldness. Dake's gaze became dignified. He immediately realized that the Li Yuan giant fiend that Jeffrey had summoned at the beginning was probably just a trap to lure people into. And the snow crystal that was summoned later was the real main force. Seems like you've already figured it out. Jeffrey's voice was transmitted through the loudspeaker. While reaching out to take out 2 new magic cards, he said to Dake, My Li Yuan giant fiend has the curse of the dead. Even if you succeed in defeating it, you'll have to pay the same price. That green-eyed dragon whelp of yours should be your latest trump card, right? You're pretty lucky to be able to draw your trump card at the beginning of the match. What a pity. As he spoke, the snow crystal in the red side summoning area was still growing. However, Dake had already retracted his gaze and looked at the two new magic cards in his hands. Greed 3, Pride 3. With the two Great Sins 3 in his hands, the magic card composition in Dake's hands seemed to have come alive in an instant. Whether it was using Greed 3 to evolve Meow Meow into Cat Boss, or using Greed 3 or Pride 3 to evolve Fantasy Beast, Ibu into Icy Ibu or Sun Ibu, it was a good choice. If he used Greed 3 to evolve Fantasy Beast, Ibu into Icy Ibu, he could also use Frigid Desert S field effect to strengthen Icy Ibu. Sure kill skill, Blizzard. However, Meow Meow was different from Fantasy Beast Ibu. It could only rely on Greed 3 to evolve. Once Greed 3 was used on Fantasy Beast Ibu S evolution, then Meow Meow would lose the possibility of evolving. Dake quickly looked at the Diru Beast in his hands and gave up on using Meow Meow and Fantasy Beast Ibu as sacrifices to summon the Diru Beast. Then he twisted two fingers and pulled out Greed 3. He then called out, Meow Meow, time to go. Meow. Meow Meow's half-closed eyes opened slightly, and a playful expression appeared on its face. Then it obeyed Dake's command and abruptly moved. Almost at the same time, Jeffrey also shouted loudly, Frigid Desert Ice Essence. Let everyone here experience the blizzard on Frigid Desert. Woo! The howling of the wind became louder and louder. That snow crystal, Frigid Desert Ice Essence, had already turned into a huge ice ball with a diameter of 3 meters. In nearly 10 seconds, it had grown from a palm-sized snowflake to a huge ice ball that looked like countless intertwined ice thorns. The whole of Frigid Desert seemed to be under its control. A huge blizzard was quickly generated with it as the center. Jeffrey tapped his finger again and began to summon a new magic card that he had drawn. His gaze swept across the field, and he had a feeling that victory was in his hands. There were two types of field effects on the field, but Dake's trump card was restricted by the curse. A 1-star magic fairy was guarding the magic ball, and the first tier, Meow Meow, was running from the blue side summoning area to the red side summoning area. Jeffrey had a deep impression of this Meow Meow. He knew that it had a special sure kill skill that could borrow force to attack force. However, that was obviously a counterattack against physical attacks, and its Frigid Desert Ice Essence was a pure magic fairy. As long as it did not exert force, it would naturally not be able to borrow force to attack force. Card name, Frigid Desert Ice Essence. Type, Fairy card. Level, *******. Race, Elemental. Attribute, Ice, Magic 3000, Attack 1000, Defense 1000. Sure kill skills. Heart of Ice Element, Blizzard, Icicle Spear Array, Freezing Ray. Although this magic fairy card with 4 sure kill skills was only a 4-star card, it was a genuine gold card. The Heart of Ice Element, which was 1 level higher than the Elemental Eye. Not only could this Frigid Desert Ice Essence be summoned without any sacrifice in an environment with a high concentration of ice elements, it could also continuously absorb the surrounding ice elements to grow. In just 10 seconds, the Frigid Desert Ice Essence had used the Heart of Ice Element to increase its magic from 1,000 points to 3,000 points. Although it could not exceed 3,000 points of magic power, it could still rapidly absorb the ice elements to replenish its magic power before the Frigid Desert Ice Essence field energy was completely absorbed. If he added the Ice Realm point that he was about to summon, the Frigid Desert Ice Essence would be strengthened even further. Meow. A hurried meow sounded. Jeffrey looked at the gray cat that was charging headfirst into the blizzard and sneered in his heart. However, just as his laughter was about to overflow, he suddenly noticed an extremely deep blue light flash across his vision and forcibly inserted into the blizzard created by the Li Yuan Ice Essence. Then, from the gradually violent snowstorm, a blazing white light burst out. Meow Meow, evolve, Boss Cat. Dake Diming's voice rang out clearly. Boss Cat, who had completed his evolution in the snowstorm, stretched out his long limbs. His thick fur completely blocked out the snowstorm that was coming at him. Fur coat. Big Boss Cat's thick and smooth fur can reduce damage taken. Any damage received during battle will be halved. It was energized, completely ignoring the blizzard's attack, and walked forward with graceful steps. Boss Cat and Li Yuan Ice Essence were both gold cards with 4 sure kill skills, but if one were to compare which one was stronger, Jeffrey suddenly realized that this round-faced big cat's defensive ability was actually stronger than the young green-eyed dragon that was also in the snowstorm. His expression changed slightly, and the ice realm point in his hand suddenly shone brightly. Seeing that Jeffrey had activated another magic card, Dake said lightly, "Is that all?" He did not continue to activate Pride 3. Instead, he gave a new order to Boss Cat, "Stop playing." Meow. Boss Cat turned around to look at him. The blue pearl on its forehead glowed slightly, and its omega-shaped mouth curled up. Then, it turned its head and suddenly accelerated. Under the situation where the blizzard's damage could not penetrate, Fur Coat, Boss Cat was not affected by the blizzard at all. In the blink of an eye, it had already rushed to the front of the Li Yuan Ice Essence. It was the first time Jeffrey saw the evolved form of Meow Meow, and he had no idea about this round-faced big cat's sure kill skill. He could only choose to believe in his magic fairy, Li Yuan Ice Essence, Ice Realm Point, Freezing Ray, Extreme Ice Seal. In an instant, the Ice Realm Point in his hand burst out a dazzling blue light. That icy blue light beam shot down from above, and it actually went straight into the body of the Li Yuan Ice Essence. This huge ice ball with a diameter of 3 meters was dyed blue, and an extremely cold fluid was flowing in the ice ball. The surrounding blizzard stopped abruptly, and the Li Yuan Ice Essence drove the ice energy that was injected into the Ice Realm Point to perform one of the 4 sure kill skills, Freezing Ray. This sure kill skill that could freeze the opponent into ice was strengthened by the Ice Realm Point, and its strength increased directly. Even a third-tier magic fairy could be frozen in an instant. Jeffrey had once used this combination to freeze a troublesome dungeon boss into an ice cube. His original plan was to wait for Dak to summon a stronger magic guide spirit before using this move. However, the defensive ability that Boss Cat displayed made him wary of this magic fairy that he had never seen before. No matter what special sure kill skills you have, you won't be able to use them again after being frozen into ice. Jeffrey thought in his heart. He glanced past Boss Cat and looked at the blue magic crystal ball in the summoning area. Once Boss Cat was turned into ice, the strengthened icicle spear array would descend from the sky and completely shatter the blue magic crystal ball's life enchantment. Boss Cat, hold on. However, Dake Diming's calm voice instantly entered his ears, and Jeffrey lowered his gaze again. Then he was extremely shocked to discover that the strengthened freezing ray that could freeze a third-tier magic fairy into ice was completely blocked by a thin light wall. Boss Cat held his head high and raised the light wall without any fear, allowing the freezing ray to hit the light wall without moving. The blue light of the freezing ray sputtered around like a torrent, causing the ground to become even more frozen. However, even after its energy was depleted, it still couldn't freeze Boss Cat's whiskers. This is impossible. Jeffrey's face was filled with disbelief. His fingers that were holding the Ice Realm Point tightened involuntarily, and he roared, "Use Icicle Spear Array on the blue summoning area." Provoke. Dake's gaze turned cold as he gave the order again. Big Cat suddenly leaped up and stepped on the top of the Li Yuan Ice Essence. Sharp ice thorns pierced out of the Desert Ice Essence, body, but after being halved by Fur Coat, they couldn't break through Boss Cat's defense. After Boss Cat's 4 feet landed, it immediately used its sure kill skill, Provoke. Provoke. Provoke the opponent, causing the opponent to be enraged. Within 30 seconds, the opponent can only use sure kill skills that deal damage, and will only attack Boss Cat. After the Provoke, the Desert Ice Essence no longer cared about Jeffrey's order. The spikes on its body bulged as it madly stabbed at Boss Cat. However, Boss Cat yawned and looked sleepily at the Desert Ice Essence that was desperately scratching at its body. The strength of its paws did not decrease at all. The Desert Ice Essence only had 1,000 points of defense. Against Boss Cat's 2,200 points of attack, even if it was just a normal attack, it would still be difficult for it to withstand. The Desert Ice Essence. Ice thorns were smashed into pieces, but under the effect of the Ice Elemental Heart, they quickly reformed. Its mana was like a roller coaster, plummeting and skyrocketing again. Tick. The second round passed in the blink of an eye. The familiar sound of the round changing reminded Jeffrey that it was not the time to be distracted. He took a deep breath and reached for the deck. Dake, on the other hand, took out 2 new magic cards when the situation stabilized. Pride Eye, Scabbard Weapon Form. The formula for victory has been successfully written. Dake Dimming raised his head and said to Jeffrey, "Senior, if it's only at this level, it's hard to get excited." His voice became louder with the help of the amplification device. Although his tone was calm, there was a natural arrogance in it. Some of the nobles who knew about the son of the Valkyrie were shocked. The handsome young man with blonde hair and blue eyes was like a model aristocrat who walked out of a textbook. Not only was he elegant and calm, but even the arrogance in his bones was the same. The nobles, especially the middle-aged nobles, did not reject the aristocratic arrogance, but rather admired it. Of course, the aristocratic arrogance, in their eyes, was the arrogance of the strong, not the arrogance of the weak. In the past, when they heard about the son of the Valkyrie's willful behavior, they only thought that he was the latter. But now, they realized that he was the former. Rumors were always better than seeing it with their own eyes. If they did not see it with their own eyes, even if they heard from others that the son of the Valkyrie had been reborn, not many people would believe it. When more people found out, saw, and confirmed his past, it would be regarded as prejudice. They must be jealous, right? Those who had only heard of him but had never seen him with their own eyes would even be suspicious of those who spread the rumors. Dake Diming's performance in these 2 short rounds was enough to give rise to such thoughts. In the face of Dake's arrogance and contempt, Angus Jeffrey's suppressed emotions gradually surged. He arranged the magic card, took a deep breath, and smiled. What's the rush? This is just the beginning. Both sides instantly started the third round. Boss Cat, attack the magic ball. Dake raised Pride Eye and issued an order. Although Boss Cat suppressed the Li Yuan Ice Essence, its ultimate skill configuration, which carried out a defensive mindset, was not enough to shatter the Li Yuan Ice Essence, which had the Heart of Ice element. Dake decisively changed his mindset and ordered Boss Cat to attack the magic ball to delay Jeffrey's footsteps. Hearing the order, Big Boss Cat stomped on the ground and pounced on the red magic ball. The Li Yuan Ice Essence was still under the control of Provoke and actually followed Boss Cat closely, but the 3-second summoning time was fast enough. When Boss Cat was about to touch the red magic ball, Jeffrey's summoning was already completed. He decisively chose to summon at the position of the red magic ball, and the huge summoning circle instantly lit up. Dake narrowed his eyes slightly and did not stop casting during the whole process. Pride Eye, in his hand, was also successfully activated. Then, the dark golden ball of light that drilled out from the card surface of Pride Eye shot at the young green-eyed dragon that was entangled by Undead Curse. Boss Cat's change of attack. Jeffrey's summoning. Pride Eye's injection. 3 things that happened almost at the same time produced a huge amount of information. The onlookers didn't even know where to look for a moment. Not to mention the 2 players in the duel. Jeffrey had no time to care about other things. The moment he completed the summoning, he injected magic into his fingertips and pointed at the red magic ball below. The red magic ball was remotely controlled by magic. It shook slightly and tried to jump up. But Boss Cat's claws had already reached. 3 extremely obvious scratches suddenly appeared on the red magic ball's life enchantment, and the magic ball itself was also bounced out by the impact of this claw. 800056666 So far in the duel, the red magic ball was the first to be damaged. But Jeffrey's reaction was fast enough. He controlled the magic ball to rush up into the sky. Although Boss Cat's movements were agile and its jumping power was amazing, it did not have wings after all. It could not pursue the magic ball further. At this point, the third magic elf that Jeffrey summoned emerged from the summoning ritual. But this time, his summoning was not a special summoning that crossed ranks. What appeared in the summoning circle was only the first-rank magic elf, a round-headed white bear. As a naturally powerful race among the bird species, bears were often seen in duels. But the white bear that Jeffrey summoned was only half the height of a person. It stood upright like a puppet, and Deanna's eyes lit up. Jeffrey's intention of summoning it below the magic ball was to be safe. But since the red magic ball had successfully escaped, there was no need for the white bear to make a move. So he immediately ordered, "Sleeved white bear, snow concealment." Suddenly, there were pure white snowflakes floating around the sleeved white bear. The snow white bear opened its arms. Its entire body suddenly became transparent and quickly disappeared in the snowflakes. As its figure completely disappeared, the snowflakes fell to the ground, leaving behind a wet mark. This was a magic elf that could conceal itself. Junior students generally lacked the means to conceal themselves. Dake put a revealing powder in the deck, but it was not easy to touch the revealing powder immediately. And before the sleeved white bear became invisible, the light ball of Pride Eye had already been injected into the head of the young green-eyed dragon. Dake only observed its expression and noticed that there was a moment of struggle on its face. As expected, Dake had a well-thought-out plan and immediately said, "Young green-eyed dragon, dragon egg transformation." Just a moment of clarity was enough. The moment the young green-eyed dragon woke up from its chaotic state, it almost instinctively activated the sure-kill skill of dragon egg transformation. That was the reaction that species with this kind of nirvana skill would usually have when they encountered fatal danger. The energy waves around its body were quickly restrained after dragon egg transformation was activated. Its entire body also shrunk rapidly in the light. In the blink of an eye, it turned back to its initial egg shape. Dragon egg transformation had a long cooldown and could not be used repeatedly in a short period of time. When the light disappeared, the giant egg that was about 1.5 meters tall was revealed in everyone's sight. Dake immediately took out Pride 3 and silently said cooldown. In just 3 seconds, he immediately began to cast the usual summoning spell and activated Pride 3. But the target of the spell was not the fantasy beast Ibu that could be evolved using Pride 3, but the primordial dragon egg. After turning into a dragon egg, all the abnormal states and injuries of the young green-eyed dragon completely disappeared, as if it had returned to its state when it was just born. And the infusion of Pride 3 had infected it with the original sin of pride. The rebirth of the young green-eyed dragon was already unstoppable. The duel was in full swing. The scene of the young green-eyed dragon transforming into a dragon egg was enough to shock people. Combined with the phenomenon of its appearance through hatching, it was easy to make people think that it was about to be fully reborn. Jeffrey had obviously noticed this, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency in his heart. Once the young green-eyed dragon that had wings and could fly was reborn, it would be difficult for him to control the magic conducting ball to evade. He had to complete the summoning before that, or before it could take action after its rebirth. Jeffrey looked at the magic conducting card in his hand with a grave expression. The sleeved white bear had successfully hidden itself with the sure-kill skill, Hidden Snow. Although the desert ice essence was provoked, it could still hold on for a short period of time. There is 1 3-star magic conducting fairy, 1 4-star magic conducting fairy, and the 7-star sacrifice has been gathered. When the 3-second cooldown of the usual summoning was over, Jeffrey immediately began to cast the sacrificial summoning spell. The maximum summoning time of the sacrificial summoning spell was also 3 seconds. But even Jeffrey was unable to compress it to the 3-second limit. But under normal circumstances, a difference of a few seconds would not cause too much of a fatal impact on the situation. Jeffrey's magic power exploded, betting his fate on the last magic conducting fairy. The randomness of a magic conducting duel would affect the outcome. It was not that Jeffrey did not have a stronger magic conducting fairy, but in his current hand, the 7-star magic conducting fairy was already the strongest. Victory or defeat depends on this. Just as Jeffrey was trying to strengthen his confidence, he suddenly noticed that the cat boss's provoke effect had ended, and the desert ice essence had regained its freedom. Under the condition that it was not provoked, the desert ice essence with the ice boundary point could summon an ice thorn spear array, that covered half the field, dealing an extremely fatal blow to Dake's magic-conducting fairy ball. Even if it could not completely crush it, it could still wear off a layer of its skin. Jeffrey's mind raced, and he decisively stopped the sacrificial summoning. He shouted, "Ice Thorn, get into formation and attack. Target the blue half." Beep! The desert ice essence suddenly let out a bug-like cry, and its body spun as it rapidly floated up. The cat boss stomped its feet and narrowed its eyes as it scanned the surroundings. After absorbing the light of Pride 3, the huge dragon egg suddenly cracked open. A green-eyed dragon whelp, with dark golden stripes on its body, opened the eggshell and flew out with a flap of its wings. Green-eyed Sin Dragon, unleash your power and cleanse the world. Dark gave an order to the successfully hatched Sin Green-eyed baby dragon. Roar! A dragon roar that was even more arrogant and irritable than the green-eyed dragon whelp suddenly sounded. The sin-eyed whelp activated Sin World without hesitation. It was currently in the red area, and under its feet was the frozen ground formed by the frozen ground of Liyuan. The desert ice essence, floating in the air, was still frantically absorbing the ice energy of the frozen ground of Liyuan. However, this did not affect the activation of Sin World. The dark golden light that erupted from the Pride emblem on the inside of the dragon wings instantly illuminated the frozen ground of Liyuan. After absorbing too much ice energy, the frozen ground of Liyuan could no longer resist the erosion of Sin World. The ice on the ground melted into water. The cold air disappeared in the blink of an eye. The temperature began to rise. The entire half of the field was shrouded in the light of Sin World. Looking down from above, at this moment, half of the dual field was Light Morning Hall, and the other half was Sin World. Just like light and darkness, good and evil, they reflected each other's brilliance. Above the sky, cold whirlpools appeared one after another, and the number of whirlpools increased rapidly. The tip of the ice spears that emerged from the cold whirlpools flashed with cold light, and the momentum was shocking. The desert ice essence's body spun at high speed, forming a small storm to protect its body. It was only the third round, and there was a scene of heaven and earth changing on the dual field. Ice spear array! Jeffrey suddenly roared. Everyone's gaze was focused. Dake's pupils contracted, but he was extremely calm as he pointed his finger. His magical power converged into a line, and he controlled the blue magic ball from a distance, causing it to suddenly fly to the red half of the field. Earbook, who was guarding the blue magic ball, also desperately moved his short legs and ran to the red half of the field. Cat Boss rushed over like a gust of wind. The sin-eyed whelp, flying in the air, suddenly aimed at the desert ice essence that was casting spells with all its might. Countless ice spears slightly adjusted their direction and shot down like a rainstorm. 4-in-1 8000 plus, 107/233. I'm not done writing. I'm going out tomorrow irritated. I'll update at the same time. Try to write more. Chapter 496. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the arena was covered by ice spears. The densely packed ice spears continued to bombard the arena, riddling it with holes in the ground where the ice water had melted. Almost everyone's eyes were fixed on the arena, trying to find the magic guide fairies that had been shot by the ice spears. However, Jeffrey, who was commanding the Liyuan ice essence to cast the ice spike spear formation, had just gotten excited, but his expression suddenly sank. He clearly felt that something was wrong, and without hesitation, he organized the summoned sacrifice again. Roar! Almost at the same time, the blue-eyed Sin Dragon rushed out of the dense ice spears. The icicle spear formation covered a wide area, but its single attack power was not enough to kill a 6-star magic guide fairy. After the Sin blue-eyed baby dragon smashed several ice spears, it ferociously pounced on the Liyuan ice essence that was still spinning in the air. And on the ground. Remember the website, MVIP can't you? VIP. When the ice spears descended, Boss Cat had already used his ultimate skill again. Guard. Guard lasted for 30 seconds and could completely block the opponent's attack, not being affected by most ultimate skills. Its cooldown was not long, But if it was used continuously within an hour, the success rate of each use would be reduced to 1/3 of the previous one. Boss Cat, who had already used guard for the second time, was lucky enough to grab the 1/3 success rate and opened up a thin wall of light above his head. This wall of light not only protected the blue magic guide ball, but also successfully protected Ibu-chan Ibu, who was hiding under Boss Cat's protection, curled up into a ball of fur. The ice spears of the icicle spear formation shattered in the air, and ice shards fell to the ground. The blue magic guide ball being intact was obviously out of most people's expectations. However, more people's attention was attracted by the Sin Blue-Eyed Baby Dragon. The Sin Blue-Eyed Baby Dragon that had rushed out of the spear formation approached the Liyuan ice essence, and its dragon claws, which were already full of power, fiercely reached out. The huge ice ball with a diameter of 3 meters was half shattered by this claw. The Liyuan ice essence hurriedly floated up. Without the ice element provided by the Liyuan frozen earth, the Liyuan ice essence had the ice elemental heart, but there was nothing to absorb. The half of his body that had been crushed by the sinful green-eyed baby dragon would not be able to recover. As for his ultimate skills, they were all on cooldown. Under such circumstances, the Liyuan ice essence could only be used as a sacrifice. In fact, Angus Jeffrey did the same. When he used the sacrificial summoning technique again, he treated the Liyuan ice essence as a sacrifice. The 4-star Fire Plains ice essence and the 3-star sleeved white bear that was invisible could be sacrificed to summon a 7-star magic guide spirit. However, when Jeffrey's sacrificial summoning technique reached the end, and the Liyuan ice essence was about to turn into light, a sword light flashed by, and the last half of the Liyuan ice essence's body was smashed into pieces. This time, it was unable to save the situation. The ice crystal dust that fell from the sky gradually turned into magic dust. Angerver Jeffrey's expression suddenly changed. "This is a duel." Dake Dimming put down the single scabbard magic guide card and said calmly, "In a magic guide duel where the situation was constantly changing, since he chose to interrupt the sacrificial summoning technique, he had to be mentally prepared for the second sacrificial summoning technique to be interrupted. As Jeffrey's opponent, Dake Dimming certainly would not allow Jeffrey to complete the second sacrificial summoning technique so easily. As the sacrificial summoning technique was forcefully interrupted this time, Angus Jeffrey was left with the invisible, sleeved white bear. However, that sleeved white bear seemed to be just a magic guide spirit that did not have much use other than being a sacrifice. Otherwise, when the ice thorn spear formation was wreaking havoc on the battlefield, it should have come out and beat the dog while it was down. On the other hand, it was the opposite. Dake already had 4 magic guide spirits on the battlefield. Among them, the cat boss was in charge of protecting the magic guide ball, and Ivan was in charge of Sinful Green-Eyed Baby Dragon, and Single Scabbard could directly target the red magic guide ball. Battle Stage 4. 30s. The turn instantly changed. Dake issued an order to Sinful Green-Eyed Baby Dragon and Single Scabbard to attack the red magic guide ball. Jeffrey, on the other hand, added 2 new magic guide cards to his hand at the fastest speed. In his previous hand he lacked magic guide cards to resolve the situation, so he could only place his last hope on these 2 new magic guide cards. When these 2 new magic guide cards were in his hand, his incomparably stern expression instantly changed, and his eyes lit up. It took 3 seconds. He looked at Sinful Green-Eyed Baby Dragon and Single Scabbard, flying towards his magic guide ball at lightning speed, and he chose to continue casting the normal summoning technique. Sinful Green-Eyed Baby Dragon had an attack power of 3000, Single Scabbard had an attack power of 2200, and the remaining magic power of the red magic guide ball was 5666. He still had room for error for at least 1 round of attack. Moreover, when Single Scabbard's sharp edge was about to touch the red magic guide ball, the red magic guide ball suddenly disappeared without a sign, and at the position where it disappeared, a snow-white bear suddenly appeared. Location exchange? Dake suddenly opened his eyes wide and scanned the entire field, but he did not see the red magic guide ball that was replaced by sleeved white bear. Could it be that when the location was exchanged, it also exchanged its own buff? Dake's thoughts turned very quickly, and he immediately thought of this possibility. But this meant that the red magic guide ball had now entered the invisible state, and there was no trace of it at all. Bang! Sleeved white bear was immediately followed by sinful green-eyed baby dragon. Claw, and it directly exploded in the air. After that, Dake's magic guide elves immediately began to search for traces of the red magic guide ball. At the same time, above the red summoning area, a huge summoning circle lit up again. Angus Jeffrey had completed the usual summoning this time. A magic guide elf that was only at the first tier appeared in the summoning circle. "Don't be happy too early," Jeffrey suddenly shouted, and suddenly pulled out a magic guide card from the remaining cards in his hand, preparing to start the summoning after the 3-second cooldown. With the newly summoned magic elf, the magic card that he already had could finally be put to good use. Until the end of the duel, you can't admit defeat. Before the life enchantment completely shatters, everything is possible. Jeffrey's sudden surge of hot blood spurred the surrounding young nobles to cheer. But after shouting, they suddenly felt a trace of strangeness. In this duel between the 4th grade and the 1st grade, shouldn't the 1st grade say these 2 sentences? Eldest Prince Charles, who was in the secret box, crossed his fingers and supported his hands under his nose, looking deeply at the duel in the field. The intensity of this duel was far beyond his expectations, but the Dilu beast and the lion beast that he wanted to see did not appear. Fortunately, the single scabbard appeared first, and this holy sword still emitted a trace of extremely restrained holy aura. And Angus Jeffrey was more tenacious than expected, and he actually managed to drag it out. I hope he can drag it out until the arrival of the hero. Unknowingly, Charles had gone from thinking that Jeffrey would win to hoping that he could drag it out a little longer. It was only until Jeffrey's sudden surge of hot blood that he regained his interest. Light Messenger. Bliss 3 Moon. Improved. The duel did not end. Dake added 2 new magic guide cards to his hand, and looked at the magic guide elf in the red team's summoning area with a trace of seriousness in his eyes. The new magic guide elf that Jeffrey summoned belonged to the 1st grade of magic guide elves, and it was a very famous type. Thus he immediately recognized it. Card name, Underworld Ice Coffin. Type, Elf card. Level, *****. Race, Undying. Attribute, Spectre/Ice. Magic power, 2000. Attack, 0. Defense, 0. Ultimate skill, Road to the Underworld. Man in the Coffin. The magic guide elf that floated in the red team's summoning area had the appearance of a small coffin, but it was made of ice. Thus it was crystal clear, like an ice sculpture, and it was very delicate. The Underworld Ice Coffin was very fragile. Not only did it not have the slightest offensive ability, but it also had no defensive ability. However, its magic power had exceeded the peak of 3 stars, reaching the height of 2,000 points. Although this magic power value was not considered high among high-star magic guide elves, it represented a tendency. As a ghost and ice elemental magic guide elf, the Underworld Ice Coffin's body was made of ice. This caused it to lose the special ability of a ghost, to ignore physical attacks. It was very fragile, as if it could be shattered with one punch. In fact, this was indeed the case. However, according to legend, there was a great terror residing in the ice coffin. Once the ice coffin shattered, a terror would descend. The spirit that crawled out of the ice coffin would devour everything. As a magic guide elf, the Underworld Ice Coffin was created by imitating the legend. The great terror, residing in the ice coffin, was the magic guide elf that was recorded in the legend in advance. Therefore, the magic guide card, the Underworld Ice Coffin, usually existed as a carrier. Summoning it was equivalent to obtaining a special way to summon the recorded magic guide elf. This was actually similar to a ritual summoning. The recorded magic guide elf also had restrictions. Firstly, it had to be an undying species or a ghost type. Secondly, its star level had to be no lower than the Underworld Ice Coffin, and no higher than 2 times. Jeffrey's Underworld Ice Coffin was a 3-star magic guide elf. The recorded magic guide elf was in the 3-star to 6-star range. Other than that, there were many additional restrictions that were difficult to analyze. The ritual summoning condition was to break out of the coffin. In other words, in theory, as long as the underworld ice coffin was not shattered, the recorded magic guide elf could not be specially summoned. At first, Dake thought so too, until a 10-second countdown appeared on Jeffrey's underworld ice coffin. Dake had never heard of the underworld ice coffin being able to open by itself. However, Jeffrey's underworld ice coffin was clearly very special. It was very likely that there was a 6-star coffin man residing in its coffin. So this is the foundation of a 4th-year student? Dake casually activated Bliss 3, Moon Improved, patching up the weakest link in his current lineup. Ivan, who was curled up into a ball, bathed in the radiance of bliss, and evolved into Moon Ivan after a long time. Pink ring-shaped patterns appeared on the black and nimble body. The power of the moon rippled all over his body, not weakening even in the daytime. Moon Ivan, Wave of Evil. Before the underworld ice coffin was broken, Moon Ivan roared in a low voice. The evil aura released from his body slightly brewed, then suddenly exploded. The aura full of evil turned into a black light, crazily radiating in all directions like a tide. When dealing with an invisible opponent, apart from breaking invisibility, the most direct method was to use an area of effect attack. Moon Ivan intentionally lowered the damage of Wave of Evil and increased the area it covered. In the blink of an eye, the entire field was filled with black waves. The red magic guide ball had nowhere to hide. Xiao, the single scabbard, reacted the fastest. With the sound of wind breaking, the longsword shot down from the sky, instantly piercing through the red magic guide ball's life enchantment. 56662801. After 2 rounds of attacks, the red magic guide ball's life enchantment fell to 2801. Rise! Jeffrey fiercely pressed the magic guide card in his hand. The moment the card lit up with a strong light, he immediately shot out magic power, controlling the red magic guide ball to fly back to the red half. Dake Diming's response was faster than expected, leaving him unable to react. But at this moment, the countdown on the underworld ice coffin had reached 0, and the magic guide card in his hand had been successfully summoned. The outcome was set. But when he looked up at Dake, trying to observe the change in his expression, he found that Dake was still looking at him with a gaze full of ridicule. Jeffrey's heart sank. Then a new magic guide card automatically flew out from his deck, emitting a dim light. In the red summoning area, the underworld ice coffin, as road to the underworld, had reached the end. The 10-second countdown successfully reached 0, and the door of the ice coffin was pushed open from the inside. A pale-skinned humanoid magic guide elf, the Frost Lich, sat up straight in the ice coffin. The graceful Frost Lich had a tall and exquisite figure. Its thin long robe clung to its skin, and blue blood flowed under its skin. The ice crown on its head was shining. Its facial features were deep, and the corners of its eyes were long and narrow. Its beautiful face revealed a hint of harshness. When it stepped out of the ice coffin, the frost scepter, that was falling from above like a meteor, suddenly stopped in front of it. It reached out and grabbed the frost scepter. Instantly, icy blue ripples spread wildly. The temperature plummeted. 2-in-1 4000 plus. Designing this underworld ice coffin almost killed me. Wake up and get high. It's the last day of May. Brothers, don't waste the moon flakes and blades. Wait for me to wake up. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.